States, we don't have a Hannibal directive. All right. October 7th was a military defeat. October 7th was where the Hamas came across the border and took you by surprise. They killed nearly 400 Israeli military personnel. The remaining people, about 800, the majority of them were killed by you and your military, who hunted them down because of the Hannibal directive. We now know that the vast majority of Israeli civilians killed on October 7th were killed by the IDF, by Apache helicopters, by tanks, by your own soldiers. The Israelis say as they were driving us, the hostages, as they were driving us back into Gaza, we were attacked by helicopters. One lady, you killed my husband, you killed my child, I was wounded. We know the Israelis slaughtered their own people. Benjamin Netanyahu, do not equate America with that, because as bad as we are, we don't kill our own people, you son of a bitch.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours.
Friday, March 15th, 2024. Thank you for joining me today. A little bit of a slip up there. I didn't plan to play that last little mini curse at the end, so I apologize for those that were abruptly surprised by that, since we don't usually have cursing on this show. It is a family-friendly show, for those that don't know that. Aside from all of the horrible things that happen in the world that we're trying to make better. But in general, we try to not curse. And you know, there's a lot of families that I know that actually watch the show as their news and so on, along with other independent media. In any case, that it's a great opening clip because it's important, and it's something that is one of those kind of shockingly obvious, unacknowledged realities that we all see in front of us. I'm going to go over a couple of them again today. There's a lot of them. It's really alarming. And it shows you how many people are willing to just ignore what you can prove because of a political agenda, because of a partisan side, because of any number of things. But the reality of what he's saying is true. We're at a point now that the evidence shows, and that I would still put a pin in that to say that it's possible that more evidence and, you know, people coming back from Gaza, who knows how the story could change. I'm not going to say, that's not my opinion. I think the evidence is clear, but I wouldn't say we have all of the evidence to this discussion yet. My point is that with the evidence we have, it's very clear to me that the Israeli IDF killed more people than Hamas did in this dynamic. Now, doesn't mean that Hamas didn't take more people, but the only way you understand this, if you're shocked by that, is that the narrative that you've been told that their agenda was to rape and pillage and murder has been completely shown. I mean, it's been shown to be false in 15 different ways. And that's not to say that they're not capable of that, or any group, government, militia wouldn't be ultimately capable of that, or people within it. But that it was very clear that based on the evidence, that's not what happened. That they were going in with the interest of taking hostages in order to exchange them. And this whole thing is completely one by one, step by step, narrative by narrative, atrocity propaganda claim by atrocity propaganda claim, been broken down to be not just incorrect, but flat out lying. And they know that they're lying. And then we go into the Hannibal directive conversation, and how many people, as he was highlighting, have admitted, I saw it. A colonel that I'll play for you again. The security head at the kibbutz area saying, I was there. They shot their own people. It's really crazy. But that is something we'll get into today. Another video that I was going to get into in the last show, but ultimately just didn't have enough time to show you just how clear this really is. But quite frankly, you shouldn't need to see this video in regard to deciding whether or not this is the case. Obviously, it's more evidence, but the evidence is so far is overwhelmingly obvious. Now, we're going to talk about that probably in the middle of the show in general. We're going to start with a couple of important points of things that, interestingly enough, on that same point, shockingly obvious truths that we were breaking down right in the beginning of the COVID illusion up all the way through it, that have now weirdly come to pass, just like we promised they ultimately would. And that doesn't always happen that way, but things that we're going to get into, like long COVID, just a brief point to show you what you might have seen circulating, that it's shocking what we were already telling you. Now, I'm not sure why these things are shifting in the corporate media. Maybe it's just they're so aware of how much they've lost because of pandering for Israel that they're just kind of throwing bones out everywhere. Like, oh yeah, long COVID's not real. Oh, by the way, ethylene oxide's dangerous, and all these things that we were telling you and censored for, by the way, and shouted down. We'll go over a quick point of that stuff. Another quick point about TikTok. I want to reiterate a couple of points that are just to continue to show you what this really is about. And I think, again, this is wildly transparent, getting a really aggressive push from the partisan discussion. And, for those that are not lost in either side of that, the evidence is clear, unless you're leaning into one story or another that might make sense, but with the facts, basically you can juxtapose things just like scientific studies do to make it look like this could be the case. Doesn't prove it. But of course, when you look at the facts in the right way, which is organize them and not with the interest of trying to make something happen, but just look at the facts objectively, it seems very clear this has nothing to do with China. In fact, it has everything to do with Israel. And it's not new. And we've gone over this plenty of times. We're going to talk about the right of return again. And I'm going to try to make it brief, but I want to make sure. I realized looking back at the show yesterday, I completely messed that point. I mean, I got the point across, but I wanted to read that United Nations point, and there was that secondary section that I forgot to go to. Really important. So I want to make sure I just reiterate that in the part that I missed, because it's such a central part about this whole conversation. It really is the crux of the issue when it comes down to the Middle East conflict discussion, when it goes back to really the truth of the conversation around the occupation and what the Palestinians are truly fighting for. They're just turning in these things that Israel's already agreed to going back decades into suddenly being terrorism because you don't like them anymore. That it suggests that you're no longer going to be where you are, and that means genocide, even though you already agreed to this. And it's not that you're going to be gone forever, but you just simply give them part of that area. And we've gone over all of this, and it's wildly disingenuous and provably dishonest from the people that are currently in power. But the other main part of today is going to be about the food aid, because it really is something that I want to make clear in the title today. This is consistent. I mean, more consistent than most of the things that I keep seeing, where this has been near every day. The same locations, the same tactics. Like, the point is, I think Palestinians even know what they're doing, but they're starving to death, so they're going to try anyway. Why not? Let's go out and possibly get shot by the IDF, and maybe one of us will go to Flour Bag. Make sure you take it back to the starving children. Like, that's how this is actually going. And it makes me, I can't even put it in words. No words actually do it justice for the kind of repulsion that you feel when you recognize not just that it's happening, but that people are driving it, laughing about it, praising it. And then on the other side of that, people in the United States government and Western powers telling you not only that it's okay, but that it's allowed, it's the right thing. We have to keep giving them weapons because they're defending themselves. It's just this, they really have dismantled everything that they thought they were creating for the kind of normie audience that thought they were, fighting for rules-based international order and sustainability and equity and equality, all these things they were professing, and they've lost all of that. Whatever ground they had has been washed away because they just don't care about exposing it all for this one thing. And this is the kind of thing that a lot of new people and a lot of people that have been screaming about this are trying to make sure you highlight that one point: Zionism. That is what we're highlighting here. That's what this all is. Not every single part of it, but the fact that that thing you keep noticing, why is that happening? Why are they completely ignoring this thing? Why are they all blindly bowing to this one thing? It's clear it's about Zionism. And it's so very obvious. And the main crux is to try to make you think that that means we don't like Jewish people. And it's just, just even saying it out loud, it's ridiculous. Again, as always, maybe there's an overlap for some people out there. The reality is the main gigantic majority of the conversation are people simply going, Zionism is a 150-year-old political ideology. Judaism is 2,500 years old. They're not the same thing, and is an obvious manipulation. And it's very clear that that is dismantling, disintegrating in front of us, as well as a couple of other things we will get into about AIPAC and some stuff to end. We'll see where we ultimately get to, but there's a lot of important stuff to break down. I want to start with the COVID narrative, medical freedom, overlappings that like I said in the beginning, that you already know. If you watch this show in 2021, you're already well aware of all of this stuff. But thank you for Rich People Weekly for shouting this out for me. So I saw this. Otherwise, I probably would have missed it, because they're flying under the radar. Like, I'm not even seeing this being largely promoted, and maybe I'm just missing it, but by people that are still kind of fixating on the COVID conversation, which I'm glad they're doing that. There's still a lot going on there. And yet I still didn't see this, which is interesting to me. And maybe that's because of social media and control flow of information. And I'm just not seeing what I think I'm supposed to be seeing, all that stuff. But he writes, Remember those swabs they told you needed to basically touch your brain to test for COVID? Which, by the way, remember, they've never to this day justified why that ever made sense. You tell me why anybody, give me one reasonable example where somebody in a public a medical or health authority, or what's the word I'm looking for, the medical field, who gave you a rational explanation for why they needed to take those swabs and jam it up to your brain. And they didn't say that, but we know that they were literally going near the blood-brain barrier. The point being, you didn't even need to go up into the nose. You needed around the nose, in the edge of your mouth, which is, by the way, what they're doing now, because it wasn't about anything beyond saliva. So why were they consistently jamming those things? And there was examples of children getting nosebleeds. That's not normal. Anyway, there's something very weird there that I think I know very clearly what it is, but it's my opinion. And that has to do with the testing for certain presence of certain things. The blood-brain barrier is Dr. Palevsky, for example, before, right in the beginning of all this, kind of before the COVID illusion really kicked off, we had a very powerful testimony in front of Congress talking about how all these things end up crossing the blood-brain barrier, and they can prove that. And so not just the not benign, but the things from the past, aluminums and whatever else, but getting into the field of God knows what else, nanotechnology and the stuff that we're really talking about that we can prove is real, not just hypothetical, but real world, tangible. Whether or not it was actually used in these injections, I don't know. But the question is why they were testing for that. It's a very important question that I felt necessary to harp on for the last minute and a half. So think about it. Now, the point is that they were doing that. Nobody cared. And people like us were like, hey, wait a minute. Because not that I knew that there'd be something there, but I thought, well, that's strange. Like what else could be a problem here? Like other than the hypotheticals, which we should ask, what are they doing? What are they planting? What are they taking? Who God only knows, right? I figured let's see if there's just any other issues with the general things we already know, right? Which is always what I tried to do in on the side of the things that we're theorizing about. Like, could there be something else there? And that turned out to be what they sterilized these things with. Anything, by the way, tongue suppressors, any of this stuff. So it's not that it's unique to this one thing, except it was being jammed up into your brain, which made it a hell of a lot more important and dangerous. Turns out, as he writes, ethylene oxide used to sterilize the swabs is actually really bad for you. And it's breaking news as of yesterday. Associated Press. EPA, because they care about you, right, tightens their limits on a chemical used to sterilize medical equipment for like the last 3 decades. But now we care all of a sudden, right? Or, East Palestine, because they pretend nothing's happening there, but let's focus on this thing that we just made sure every child in the country got jammed in their brain, but now we care about it. It's just so insulting that we even pretend, like, are we pretending the EPA didn't hear this conversation? They didn't hear people like us screaming at the top of our lungs about how there's a problem here, about how we covered this in 2021, COVID-19 test swabs and ethylene oxide. Is there a risk? Answer is yes. Now, I argued in this, it wasn't shockingly bad. It was simply that there's a risk. There's a clear risk, and that I proved that it does accumulate. That was my point. Well, there's people taking these tests every third day, every day, every fifth, there's people that were taking these tests multiple times a day. So I simply made the point. Don't they have a right to know that that's going to harm them, even if it's a little bit? Obviously. Here's the longer episode if you want to watch the full show. That was the clip we did. 2021. And so it's just crazy that they go through and they go, oh, guess what? Breaking news. We did the thing that Ryan did 4 years ago. Looked into it. Or they knew all along and didn't care, and this is just an effort to go, hey, look over here. Or, hey, we trust us. We actually care about you, even though we clearly don't. I don't know. But I just want you to recognize, demonstrating our value, along with a hell of a lot of other great independent media. We were breaking this down before the Environmental Protection Agency that literally has $1 billion mandate or whatever it is from your government. Here we are struggling to get by, being sued, being attacked, and we still broke this story 3 years before the EPA. Shocking. Enough pat myself on the back. I think it's important, though, and thank you for Rich People Weekly for highlighting this. Now, the other point, same thing. Time to stop using the term long COVID, as symptoms are no worse than those after a flu, study says. Now, that's one way to frame the finding. Another way to frame the finding is how the Telegraph put it. There's no such thing as long COVID, says health study. Now, they're both pointing at the same study. The point is, I think that mean the same thing. Now, let me explain why I say that. Now, my argument has never been that long COVID was literally not there, but it was a combination of misrepresentations. either literally sick from something else, or that you have the flu and you're calling that long COVID, or you had some kind of residual problem from the vaccine and you're calling that long COVID, or one of the possibilities, literally that it actually was psychosomatic. Every single one of those things have been proven by peer-reviewed science. Well, I shouldn't say proven, but found by peer-reviewed science. I've shown you all of them over the years. I'm not going to waste your time going back and making a 45-minute segment about something you all already know. But there's people out there that still believe this is real. People are commenting under me posting this today going, "You're crazy. I know I had it." And I'm like, God, what a subjective and self-serving statement. How do you, and I just point at it and say, you mean, the point is that if it's psychosomatic, then that means you think you know that. You know, one of my favorite quotes is Mark Twain, right? I might be kind of paraphrasing, but it's not what you know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. And my God, if that's not half of what goes on in this country right now. But the point is that if it's no worse than the flu, what it's really saying is that it's not. The point is that long COVID has become this like unique, specific problem that we all have to worry about. And even if you don't think it's worrisome, the point they were making is that it's this unique, independent thing, not just residual, lasting illness, like, which, by the way, is this. People tried to say this in the beginning of long COVID conversation. It's after everything. You have a cold, the flu. It's a very common study that people have residual symptoms after it goes away. Whatever that is, there's a very common thing. So the point they're making is it's not new and it's not different. And it very well may not even be related to COVID or whatever you think. COVID may not even be present if we're really getting honest about it. It's just simply something that is benign, normal, and it's not some worrisome, lasting problem. And my point is that is what they're trying to say about the general topic. But while trying to kind of argue that it's just benign for you to ignore it. But my point is this feels like an effort to sidestep what it really is. The vaccine causing continual lasting immune problems. But they just dump on this one thing because it was simple. It was easy. Scapegoat. Now they're just trying to go, well, just ignore that. Probably so they can, in 6 months, put those same problems on some new justification. Because they're not going away. These people are still, these people will have these most likely for the rest of their lives. That's the immune issue they caused because they took a gene therapy that they didn't even care to look into. Because they trusted the government. Exactly. How many times we heard that in our lives, our history. Dude, why you would ever trust a government? It's mindlessly crazy to me, but it's not there. There is no such thing. And yet people have been pushed using this long past the illusions. I mean, the illusion itself being illusion, but the point is the long after they were even talking about it, this has dragged this conversation in. And I really genuinely think this is going to be used again. And as I said, just a reminder that TLAV's been breaking the lie of the long COVID down since the moment it was pushed. A lot of grifters out there are trying to use the COVID info, not just this, but everything around this conversation. Eli David is what triggered me to say this, that basically to use this COVID info that has long since been exposed, but like as if it's new, to gain your trust so they can later abuse it. That's my opinion, but just be skeptical, guys. I think there's a lot of people out there that have sidled up next to a lot of honest, independent media out there and just kind of grabbed on and said the same things during other conversations. And clearly they're not marshaling that trust and support into a very dangerous genocide. But there's a lot of other things that could be happening too. It's not just unique to Israel. Just recognize how often that's happening, or just the mainstream alternative media and how that is very clearly something being built around us right now. But thank you to Charlie Robinson for saying this. I love this. And maybe I'm actually going to do this, but he said, that's why. And I basically said, that we were ahead of this. And he said, that's why I think you should change your logo to a DeLorean, because it's like information from the future. He said that in our interview too. And I thought that was very kind of him, because I'm not always ahead of every story, but and shout out to Charlie Robinson in the same light. He's somebody who is dedicated to the work and believes in being objective and largely nonpartisan, like all of us try to be. We all have our opinions. I just think it's important to recognize people like Charlie and the rest of the entire Union of Unwanted crew out there trying to do what they think is right based on not partisan drive, but ultimately that we believe in what we're doing and that we do our best to be factual and prove what we're saying. And that usually translates into being ahead of the story. Shocking. Doing it the right way works for you. But thank you, Charlie. I really appreciate that. And he says, you're always 12 to 24 months ahead of everyone else. It's remarkable. Again, that's just because we're not driven by partisan narratives and controlled information flows. But maybe I'll put a DeLorean in there. That might be fun. But here's a post we did from 2021, February. masks lead to bacterial pneumonia, which is an easily proven fact. This is the time when it was so crazy obvious. Things like natural immunity became fake news. It was really a psychosis situation, guys. I don't know how else you explain that. And then masks lead to bacterial pneumonia is a very provable reality, or just literally any, breathe through your t-shirt for all day. The moisture, it's very clear how that worked. The point was oral thrush, dentists were screaming about this right in the beginning, systemic inflammation, all of that, maybe the actual cause of long haul COVID all the way back then. That was just one of the things I picked up on. And you can combine that with the point I was saying up here. This was in 2023. I pointed it out. It was another one. Here's a fourth one, finding a study peer-reviewed that long COVID is largely psychosomatic. Now, what's funny is I said largely, which does not mean entirely. And the comments you get below is like, that's not what the finding says. And it's like, I know what the finding says. I literally highlighted it. I've read it 45 times. It's clear that it's not entirely what they're saying it is. And then when you conflate it with everything else, obviously vaccine side effects and everything else we're talking about, it's quite obvious what's happening here. And now we even have corporate media literally saying it. And yet the same people screaming, trust the science, are the ones now challenging the science and going, you're wrong. I know I had it because Biden told me. It's just so incredibly contradictory. Anyway, the TikTok conversation I wanted to highlight again because I thought this was interesting and very relevant to where our media sphere is going. Glenn Greenwald said this today. Both the Wall Street Journal and Economist state explicitly that the only reason the TikTok ban gained widespread support, or just call it the TikTok bill or whatever you want to call it, because it's going to be a ban. I highly doubt these people are going to just divest their company over to somebody else. And maybe if they're just happy to take the profit, but I mean, most people want to run their company. I think it's, you're basically coercing through coercion, forcing them to sell their company because the United States wants to control it. In any case, the point is that that will translate to a ban is my point. But widespread support is the belief that TikTok allows too much anti-Israel support. Both Wall Street Journal, Economist, and just about everybody else are being very clear about that. So why is the right conversation making it about China? Well, that was clearly the kind of shell game that was being played, but that fell apart really fast. Because the argument was China was manipulating the algorithm and forcing this stuff into the feed. It wasn't accurate. It wasn't genuine, except Greenblatt is on the record on his own conversation saying that it is accurate. We just need to suppress it. Everything's dishonest coming from the Zionist control, guys. It's crazy. And he says the House leader for the bill, Mike Gallagher, said that's why Dems support it now, because they're trying to basically allow, the argument being from the statement anyway, not that I believe that's what's actually happening, that they're trying to allow the bill because they want people to be able to talk bad about Israel, or be able to say what they think. Frankly, I don't ever think that it's as simple as they're fighting for what they believe in. I think a lot of these people are always being driven by all sorts of lobbyists and agendas and whatever else. The bottom line is they see an interest in fighting for that side, probably to regain your trust. In any case, it's not genuine. The bill is not what they say it is, and it's very clearly about trying to censor criticism of Israel. Here is what Glenn said today.
The executive director of the Anti-Defamation League, Jonathan Greenblatt, who long before October 7th has been a crusader for censorship of things he doesn't like. He was urging Fox News to fire Tucker Carlson for years. Went on to Morning Joe and essentially made,
which I don't even think is genuine, just my personal opinion,
clear that the concern of the pro-Israel lobby in the United States is that there are too many social media platforms, in particular the ones catering to a younger generation, that are allowing too much anti-Israel content in the United States. Here's what he told Morning Joe.
Let's be frank about it. We've been on this show. We've talked about Instagram. We've talked about Twitter or X, and you've seen my back and forth with Elon Musk. But we need to talk about TikTok. TikTok, if you will, it is the 24/7 news channel of so many of our young people, and it's like Al Jazeera on steroids, amplifying and intensifying the anti-Semitism and the anti-Zionism with no repercussions. I've got to ask, Joe.
See, just by the way, before even Glenn talks, you realize he's completely conflating anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. And he tried to do it so quickly, like he didn't even finish saying anti-Zionism, because it's become so transparent. Even in corporate media conversations, it's really one of the things I keep talking about. How you've ever tried to pretend that, one, the state of Israel is like, rather that it's like the Jewish nation. It's not. You're not Jewish because you're living in Israel. You're Jewish because you practice Judaism. That conflation of the two things have always been a huge manipulation. And even aside from the state of Israel conversation, the point is that Zionism is a political organization. It's a fraction of the time frame that's existed. But how can you pretend? Isn't that insulting to Jews to say that Zionism is Judaism? I mean, that's like saying being a Republican is Christianity. That's really insulting, right? I mean, I don't know why anybody. I do know why. I think most people. Here's how I view this in general: is that this has been something. I'm going to go back to the right of return point in a second. That was very on the surface of the conversation. It was very clear. And the UN had enshrined it. People were talking about it. The Arab countries were standing up and pushing back. And the point is, after this got set, I think kind of post 1967 discussions, it's basically, I think they put so much effort and so much time into the lobbying efforts and just kind of stalling the conversation that year after year after year passed, where they got enough support, enough push, and enough buy-offs and enough influence to where people just started pretending it wasn't the case. And then people are still going, wait a minute. They're violating this resolution. We never resolved that. And they just funding, influence, lobbying. One more year by, that stops being said. And you look back and those things don't even exist anymore. Guess what? Palestine is not even real. That's the influence of lobbying. That's what these people are actually doing, in my opinion.
Intensifying the anti-Semitism and the anti-Zionism with no repercussions. I've got to ask, Joe.
Is it a coincidence that the Anti-Defamation League went on to MSNBC and announced that their main concern was TikTok and the fact that TikTok is allowing too much anti-Israel speech in December of 2023, and less than 2 months later, this has become the #1 priority of the American Congress?
Think about that. And now it's important. It is clearly a bipartisan issue, but realize this is being driven aggressively. I can't talk right now. Driven aggressively from the right side of this conversation. There's far more blind Zionist Israel support from the right, especially right now. But I'll tell you, it's not a partisan issue, guys. There's a lot of Republicans that are speaking up about this. A lot. Now, even if the ones that might say they support the state of Israel are still be screaming about the fact that there's genocide taking place here. So it's important to see those differences like we saw during COVID-19. They always want you to think this is a specific partisan divide, so they keep you divided. It's not the case. It's just not. And that's what Greenblatt admits in that secret recording that he didn't want anybody to hear. It's not a partisan issue. It's not. It's about the young generation. That's why they're going after TikTok.
Let's listen to the rest of what he said.
Like, there's been a lot of lamentations about the fact that TikTok's ownership is Chinese, but you know what? Oracle owns 10% of the company. General Atlantic owns a piece of the company. Our friends at Sequoia Capital own.
Well, that's pretty interesting. You see, this is a classic Israeli tactic, in my opinion, rather Zionist specifically, which is to say, basically what they're doing there is they're undermining the core point of the U.S. Congress in order to make the point to kind of stick it to them a little bit. Like, how dare you say that? You're involved too. Basically what they're essentially doing, and this is constantly what Israel does. Rabbi Shmuley does it constantly when he talks about people, is he kind of goes, you're friends and we respect you, and but like, you're stepping too close to the edge. You better not do this or we're going to attack you even more. That's what he's doing. Essentially kind of threatening a little bit, right? Well, you guys are problematic too, but you're on the right side of this. You better be careful. So, but by saying that, you're admitting that, guess what? The U.S. entities are also invested in TikTok. So hold on a minute. Are we pretending this is still a Chinese-only company? Isn't that the whole narrative? He just completely blew that apart. Not the point that that ByteDance might not still have complete control over the content, which I think it's provably false, by the way. Influence, probably. But that completely changes the dynamic. Where if all these people are screaming about how it's about the divestiture, well, what about the U.S. entities that have involvement? I just think that's really interesting.
A piece of the company. So does Sequoia and General Atlantic, does Oracle want to be responsible for spreading anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism? It's time to talk about TikTok.
And by the way, regardless of what you think about that, being able to spread those or whatever he calls those, whatever things he calls that's called free speech. There's no law that says you can't be racist, right? You can't act on those things, but they're trying to pass those laws. But it's also the fact that when I say Zionism is a terrible organization, they call that anti-Semitism. So all of a sudden I'm racist, even though I'm not actually being racist, according to them. So either way, You can't pretend that people saying things on their own social media accounts is somehow a problem, except for the fact that you don't like it. And that's why they've tried to fold in the idea that it's actually secret Chinese manipulation, because otherwise, what's their argument? You're letting people say what they want. We can't allow that. Well, you can't make that argument, not in this country, not with the pretenses that we pretend are real.
And I think we need members of Congress to be asking them, why are they doing it up? And let me be clear. I've met with Shou Chu, the CEO. I've talked to their leadership, but it is long past time for TikTok and its owners and its investors to step up and say, enough, we're going to take action.
Frank.
Okay, so all he's asking for is censorship. That's it. Censorship. Isn't it weird? And again, this is why. This is before the current iteration of this. So all it is him going, censor the people saying bad things about Israel because it's racist. Now they've turned that into China is secretly the reason that's happening. So that they thought about this carefully, in my opinion, and realized that's the only way Americans are going to get on board with censorship. Bad guy China or bad guy Russia, whichever paradigm side they're pushing. That's how they manipulate you guys. I just hope everyone can see that.
The executive director of VDO goes onto television in December and says it is time to put our foot down about not allowing TikTok to allow so much anti-Israel content. And 2 months later, the American Congress is ready to ban it for the first time in years as this proposal has been circulating, as media outlets make clear that inside Congress is in fact the impetus for why this is happening. Where are all my conservative friends who are so deeply concerned about how the internet is being controlled in order to suppress dissent
Isn't that
Washington dislikes? Shouldn't you be up in arms about this?
Yeah. But see, this is the problem. When he's doing that, he's doing the same thing. He's pointing at the hierarchy of the paradigm, the screamers on the left, right, the large ones. That's what he's pointing at. Where are the Tuckers? Where are the rest of them? Why aren't they criticizing that? Oh, because China bad guy, so censorship good, right? Sort of how like Second Amendment, no matter what, except trans people, take it away, right? That's ridiculous. You should be laughed at for being a ridiculous hypocrite and pointing out double standards. The point is there's a lot of Republicans that don't think that. There's a lot of Republicans that recognize the problem and are saying that's bad, but still going, China's a problem. Still saying China's government is an issue. If that is I think all government's an issue, but the point is if that's the way they view it, they're still saying that. They're just also saying, but you can't censor TikTok. See, that's the problem with the two-party illusion is people feel driven to kind of choose one of the two ridiculous sides, which makes you all lose. When the truth is almost always somewhere in the middle. It's constant. But I completely agree with this thought here. Now, Information Liberation puts an article up saying former Activation CEO Bobby Kotick working with Sam Altman to buy TikTok as U.S. government threatens ban, which I think is perfect. As they write, the U.S. government is moving to ban TikTok over pro-Palestine content, outperforming pro-Israel content, and force the sale of the Chinese-owned company, which is not the reality. So right there, it gives you an insight to whoever runs this website and how they frame that, to a group of Zionist investors headed by former activist CEO Bobby Kotick. So the point is, it's very interesting to me that we're seeing this transition, and it's exactly what we're talking about. Like, even if you think that this is actually about China, isn't it interesting that all you're really doing is the point that I made at the beginning is you don't really care about the propaganda and the way that this can manipulate. It's just okay as long as you guys are in control of it, right? As long as you push this in the direction of some kind of Western power or Zionist organization having dictating what it is able to do. How much you want to bet it's going to end up being just like we're dealing with today. Censoring, suppressing, ignoring, acting like it's the best thing in the world, censorship-free speech. And going, thank God we saved it from China. Which in no way is to suggest that China's good. I mean, it's just the obvious game that we're pretending this isn't happening here. Here is an article from Engadget. Activision Blizzard's ex-CEO Bobby Kotick reportedly wants to buy TikTok. And I think the interesting part about it is including partners like OpenAI CEO Sam Altman. Same thing that what he was just saying. So you got all these right-wing people that are screaming about how we need to do this because China bad. And now we're talking about it being sold to one of the most concerning elements of like the whole Great Reset direction. I mean, like the AI meta. I mean, think about that. We wrote about this in May 23rd, 2023. Sam Altman, artificial intelligence, the Bilderberg Group, and WorldCoin, where they were literally scanning your irises around the world and giving you WorldCoin. This is Sam Altman. I mean, it's just crazy to me how suddenly these things don't matter when it becomes a partisan push. Again, I'm talking about the higher level. The average people that see through this like we do see it. They call it out. But that's not what people look to. The people that are looking to somebody, which is not everybody. Hopefully more people are looking to themselves instead of trying to find someone to listen to and follow. But we just talked about that. Matt Taibbi writes today, write your senators. The TikTok ban gives the executive branch sweeping power over speech. It's the intelligence community's wet dream, a trip to 1984 in one step. Why you should urge your reps to stop it. I agree. It's a nonpartisan point, guys. We just have to be honest about where this is going, regardless of what you think is the risk here. Like it's kind of like an Assange point. It's like whatever you think about Assange, even if you think that he is not what he seems to be, which that's not what I think, but let's just say you think he's a complete CIA operative. The point is still the same. That if they use that lie to put him in jail hypothetically, and it's a raw lie, it'll still end up being used to suppress you. So it's not about whether or not at this point that's the case. It's about how they're using the story to suppress you. It's the same damn thing here. Whether you think China is behind this or not, or whatever you think, they're still going to use this to manipulate you. Now, maybe you think you'd rather be manipulated by your government than China, but I mean, that's a pretty, I don't know, naive perspective to realize that it's all government manipulation. It's a very jingoistic perspective to pretend like their lies are better for you. But that's how people think sometimes. But Censored Man also points out something interesting. He says, so as a rabbi that owns Pornhub, which I find ridiculously contradictory, but owns Pornhub, decided to remove the site from Texas once Texas implemented new laws that meant minors weren't able to see the site, which is a very, very weird and highly suggestive choice. Solomon Friedman is on a mission to save Pornhub. Now, this is just the Pornhub note saying you can't use it in Texas. I find it's interesting that they, as it says, if you read this, remove it from Texas after you're no longer able to reach that audience. Now, you could think about that what you will. My point about this is interesting, is the whole push coming from like the Zionist perspective is that TikTok is bad for children. And what they're doing, remember the push from the Republican side. They're flooding you with all these self-harm videos while over here in China, giving all the good stuff, which it's not even remotely what's actually going on. Not to say that there's not manipulation taking place. But yet this is okay. This is something we support. It seems very, very concerning to me that there's a kind of I personally think it's not about, I don't think any of these government entities or political entities care about what's right for you. I think it's about controlling you. But points out, how did this guy get reelected? I agree. This is this Mr. Eye Patch Crenshaw, which again, I mean, does anybody actually think somebody like this, like we really need to question whether any of these things are legitimate, guys. And you know my opinion on that, but listen to what this guy says. This is somebody who is basically, the whole point is that China is a problem, and any consideration that your government in the United States, in any way or shape or form, is trying to do the same thing to you is outrageous. There's no evidence for it, and you're crazy. That's what he actually says, despite all of the different hearings over the years about NSA spying and about everything else. But it's all fake news, according to Crenshaw, because your government cares about you. Just keep saying it out loud. Maybe it'll be real.
Everything TikTok has, which means data on all Americans, and with data and with access to your app that you're addicted to, you can vastly manipulate an entire population, which the Chinese have done already.
Because that's so different than TikTok or Twitter or Instagram or any of them. Is it? No, it's not. It's exactly the same thing. They just don't like that there's, again, it's either that some people, if they believe the narrative, don't like that China has an app that they're not censoring Israeli content. But I actually think it's more about just using that excuse to censor negative comments about Israel. And this guy is a wild pro-Zionist.
Are you worried that our intelligence agencies are doing the same thing domestically?
Am I worried that, I know that they're not.
Look at that. Are you worried that our agencies are doing the same thing domestically? Like, let's just be real about that. That is a provable fact. I can't believe anybody with a brain and integrity would actually say that's not real. But he goes, I know for a fact that they're not. And then the way he disregards this person and brushes him off, right? All it really demonstrates is a little small example of how the moment that you say something that they don't think you're allowed to say, you're no longer part of the media. Because obviously, politicians control who is the media, right? Because that all makes sense.
Worried that, I know that they're not.
They're not manipulating Americans? They're not controlling the flow of information?
Yeah, did you have some evidence otherwise that you'd like to share?
I mean,
okay.
Before a confrontational question, right? Like, it's not about whether I'm presenting evidence. I'm asking you a question, moron. I'm asking you, do you think? He said no, but to push back like you're supposed to pull out some document from your pocket, like it's a manipulative point. They don't do that with CNN and Fox News. Like, the point is that it's about trying to make the only real reporter there make him look ridiculous.
Some evidence otherwise?
They're not manipulating Americans. They're not controlling the flow of information.
Yeah. Did you have some evidence otherwise that you'd like to share?
I mean,
okay.
Before the 20,
any serious?
And then didn't even let him answer, by the way. So, I mean, shut up. Don't say it because you look like you have something to say. Shut up. Moving on. He literally puts his hand up and almost pushes the guy's thing away. I think it's a small point, but it speaks volumes to me.
Americans are not
controlling
the flow of information.
Yeah. Did you have some evidence otherwise that you'd like to share?
I mean,
okay.
Before the 20,
any serious questions?
So ByteDance were to say
Any serious
Congressman,
questions?
you asked for an example of the U.S. intelligence agencies meddling in our information. What about before the 2020 election when 50 members came out and said the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation? Does that count?
No, because I mean they were retired.
Oh my God, they were all retired CIA. So no big deal, you stupid moron. I mean, this guy's compromised. There's no way around it. There's no way. He is clearly deliberately disregarding what, to me, just based on his body language, that he clearly knows is real. This is the kind of thing that we are overrun with. Whether you think it's Zionism or whatever else, Russia, China, our government does not act in our interests. For crying out loud, if we can just acknowledge that one point, maybe we can make something change.
Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. Does that count?
No, because I mean they were retired.
They were retired, but the FBI
program.
The FBI had the laptop for over a year.
There's nothing even close to a TikTok.
There's no program. It's not like the NSA was literally spying on everyone's phone in the country, and we know that, and it's never stopped. Pshaw. There's no program of spying and manipulating. Like, are you serious? Like, how many times have we seen that they are literally farming your data from these platforms? Or how about the evidence of the fact that each side has claimed that they use social media? How about the fact that the Democrats themselves claim that they use social media to influence the election? Now, whether or not that's real, the point is that there's been so many allegations and so many times been proven that they are literally using this to engineer the way you see the world. And that's the response you get. Again, all this today feels desperate to me. It's like they all know that we're inching closer every moment. Know that they're lying, and we're right at them, and they are just trying to push back the other direction. Like, not just that we can discuss it and have it. Here's why. Just go fake. Everything's fake. You're a liar. Like, away. It's like Israel saying, no, they're not starving. They've got food for 45 years. It's like, what? Well, that's not true. Like, it's just so ridiculous to me. MIA points out. It says, Congress, we're really worried about foreign influence, so we have to pass this TikTok bill at lightning speed. Also, Congress, making videos for Israel lobby on TikTok. I mean, guys, it's just so stupid how it's insulting to your intelligence. It's like the thing we were saying about, YouTube or whatever else, how right when it started happening, they were saying, oh, it's a conspiracy platform for people in their basements. And then all of a sudden we're like, whoa, but you just started an account. Or when it was Gab or whichever one it was, Getter or something like that. And I showed you that there was a Congress account on these platforms while they were in Congress claiming that it was a problem. It's not about whether they care about if it hurts you. It's about whether they can control its output and it's what it accomplishes. That's all that matters. They feel like they can take over YouTube. Well, then we're good with it. They're literally on TikTok making videos for Israel to try to outweigh the negative comments. But yeah, we got to ban TikTok. It's just so insulting. Now, one other point I wanted to highlight from a Haiti discussion before we get into some Israel conversation. Ryan Grimm pointed this out. Now, I can't personally confirm the video he's showing, but Ryan Grimm is an author, investigator. And I think what's interesting is that there's a lot of evidence, regardless of this post, that already suggests there's clear U.S. involvement. Dan Cohen's been breaking this down. The lies about the cannibalism, I think, were very transparent. And it was all clearly stemming back to propaganda. And it's all about, I think, both an Israeli and U.S. agenda of what they're accomplishing there. And I also overlap that with the conversation about oh, I forgot to grab that, actually. It was right here. There was also another one. I'll grab that too. But this one in regard to the blood diamond situation in Congo, that Israel, like child labor, that Israel is literally maintaining this massive blood diamond interest in. The whole point is Israel exports, I think it's like 30% of their revenue. It's from diamond exporting. There's no diamond mines in Israel. It all comes from Congo, and it's an open secret that they use child labor. And it's horrifying. But of course, it doesn't matter. We can't talk about it. If you pointed out, you're racist, right? But I'll include this for you to check out. But the point he makes is very interesting. Back to Haiti. He says the Haitians who sacked and burned the police chief's house have posted video of what they say is a U.S. Homeland Security badge that they found there, implicating him as a special agent for Homeland Security investigations. Now, again, that's just a data point. At this point, I'm verified. For all we know that they lied about it, they put it there, all possible. Now, but I think what's interesting, and the video got to be broken down here. So for somebody that knows better, look at it, check it out, let me know what you think. What I think that what it would imply is that the U.S. government is, I mean, as we already know, very clearly taken aside and is like literally engineering on the ground what they're trying to accomplish, which means they're allowing or driving the suffering and the gang violence and everything, which is exactly what we all thought. And in fact, that we've proven time and time again over the years. Surprise, surprise. Now, on the TikTok point in general, before we get into Israel, as Isabella points out, and this is the clip we just saw back in December of of Greenblatt from ADL saying, if we can't, and she writes, if we can't go after Israel on social media, and read that as if we can't criticize them, right? Of course, the point is they're always making about what they want it to sound like. That's what she's talking about. And it says, if they're allowed to call Palestinians human animals, which is a constant these days, and still play the victim on mainstream media, if they're allowed to commit genocide and no one dares stop them, if they're allowed to influence laws in the United States, if they're that untouchable, then it's time to admit that the power of Zionism, long protected by the cloak of Judaism, is a cancerous influence that must be stopped like any other fascist ideology. The only reason that should be insulting to anybody is if you pretend Zionism is Judaism. Now, even then, let's just say that's the truth. She's expressing that she doesn't see them as the same. Now, the point then becomes, you're lying. We know you wink, wink, secretly do think that, and that becomes the pushback. Isn't that crazy? She doesn't think that, by the way. Even if you think we're wrong, we don't believe they're the same thing. The point is very clear that they're not. And that is the only last grasping effort to try to pretend like the crimes of Zionism are somehow racist to point out. And of course, Morning Joe, always happy to toe the line. But that's the truth. And we need to call this out for what it's been doing to both this country and all around. Now, by the way, I forgot I included this. Here's Torah Judaism and plenty of other Orthodox Jewish groups and just normal Jewish groups in general around the world, or not Orthodox, that have constantly called this out. They say Jewish rabbis attended the Palestine rally in Washington, D.C. This is posted today to show that they stand with Palestinian people. Israel is a terrorist state. Israel is not a Jewish state. Jews will continue to fight against Zionism in Israel. I just think that's always important to counterbalance, to show you that they're screaming that if you say exactly what these people are saying, that you're a racist anti-Semite, but these are Orthodox Jews. So work that out for yourself. Now, we just talked about the right of return. Here's the actual show about the TikTok stuff from yesterday as well. But I want to highlight this right of return conversation again. Also because this is what Elon Levy again just said today. UNRWA tells Palestinians which by the way is almost word for word what he said the same thing yesterday and like a couple days before. As usual, just incessant propaganda. That's the lie repeated becomes the truth concept. UNRWA tells Palestinians whose grandparents were refugees that they are entitled to free healthcare, which is not actually what they're even remotely saying, at the expense of an American taxpayer, by the way, which is not also the lie that this is exclusively on American taxes is because of Israel, not because that's what UNRWA or Palestinians want. But they're saying that they're entitled to free healthcare at the expense of American taxpayers until such a time as they can move to Tel Aviv. I mean, it's just so painfully, this is bad. It's moronic. It's a complete, not even just inversion. You're just making things up out of whole cloth. They're not talking about going back to Tel Aviv. Like the actual main conversation is about wherever their actual home was. That's the right of return. But today it's become post-67 conversations about actual two-state solutions, which in that conversation becomes the right of return becomes exclusively to the new location, which becomes their new Palestine. That would then be the omission of, or the, not omission, but they would then forego the argument they could go back to what would then be just considered Israel in general. But they don't want that. Israel's very clear about not wanting any of that. And that's why they try to pretend that simply acknowledging what, by the way, Israel agreed to more than once means they want to destroy Israel and to kill all Jews. But it doesn't. It explicitly means they want to make sure there's an Israel but also Palestine, both of which have self-determination. But you see, that doesn't sound dangerous, does it? That doesn't sound like they want to kill us all, so they lie about it. It says it's almost, wait for it, like it's designed to perpetuate the conflict, not solve it. No, the only thing perpetuating the conflict, Elon Levy, which you damn well know, is that you have refused to allow them the right of return. And ever since, this has been a problem. And that is why you continue to try to destroy UNRWA, which we did an entire conversation about yesterday, showing you the 1, 2, 3-step plan about it. And on that point, I guess it's not coming right up. But the point was that we just talked about this in, it was there. It was, I forget the full title. Anyway, the point was that this is a foundational. Like I said before, it's the crux of the issue. I really believe this, and it's important to see how this leads to everything else. And I said the right of return is enshrined in the very international law that you regularly hoist on others, yet consistently ignore. Israel signed an agreement to this in 1967. You've just never honored it, which is explicitly repeated constantly by the United Nations, even to this day. Pretending you don't know this is why everyone sees through you. Now, let's quickly go over some of these points again. Now, I'm going to include this. You guys can look this. I'm not going to read it all. Please make sure you look through this, but I want to reiterate some of the most important parts and then read the part that I missed. Now, this is simply talking about the right of return. The document itself is called the Right of Return of the Palestinian People, the United Nations. This is from 1978, and it has been reiterated by resolutions ever since. Now, it's basically talking about the general idea, what it means to be the right of return. It's usually people that are displaced from their home. And in most cases, it's about an individual. But when it takes on a national scale is what it discusses when an greater part of an entire nation is uprooted from its land and exiled and then denied that right to return. Now, at the time this happened for Palestinians, this didn't exist. The right of return was literally created because of this issue and has ever since been enshrined in international law for any displaced people. That's the truth. Israel just doesn't care about this obvious, provable reality. And they've tried and lobbied and pushed and paid and influenced ever since then to get people like Biden and the rest of their politicians, Trump included, to just pretend this isn't the reality. Ask Crenshaw. He'll act like he probably doesn't even know about it. These people mostly today are not even that smart, in my opinion. But it says the right of return normally would be a personal. I just went over that. But it says in our times, a notable case in this dimension is that of the Palestinian people, forced to flee their ancestral land, not just the West Bank and Gaza, guys, but all of Palestine, which is what I keep trying to show people. This has always been the reality from day one forward on this, that the UN has argued this was all, because it is always been an occupation of Palestine. All of it. Flee from their ancestral land by reason of military and political action, and then find the right of return denied them on political and legal grounds. In the case of the Palestinian people, the individual or personal right of return assumes a special significance for without its restoration, the exercise of the collective or national right of self-determination itself, guaranteed by a variety of international instruments, becomes impossible. So the point is, doesn't matter what else you try to argue. Without the right of return, you can't argue that this is ever resolved, ever. Unable to exercise the fundamental right of self-determination during the period of the mandate, although recognized in the covenant of the League of Nations as a provisionally independent nation, the Palestinian people have struggled to regain this right since 1947, when the United Nations became involved in the Palestine issue and recommended the partition of Palestine into two states, one Palestinian Arab and the other Jewish. While Israel declared independence in 1948 on the basis of that very point, war and politics prevented the Palestinian Arab state envisioned in the resolution from coming into existence. Now, this is where we get into the reality of they've never, look, there's been moments where this could have been instituted. The argument is always that, well, Palestinians are violent and they don't want that. This document explicitly cites the opposite. It says instead, the first great exodus of Palestinians fleeing from their homeland took place in 48. And the second great wave followed in 1967. First and second Nakba. From then on, the majority of the Palestinian people have been in exile, unable to return to their country, not Gaza, the entirety of Palestine, despite the right of those wishing to return to their homes and live at peace with their neighbors in Palestine having been endorsed repeatedly by the General Assembly. Now, a lot of these places exist in West Bank areas or illegal settlements. And that is the crux of the issue when it comes to the immediacy of this, that these are people that are right now willing to pledge, I don't want nothing to do with the war. I just want to go back to my home. Here's the key. Here's the deed. And Israel refuses on a broad sense because they argue they're still in some kind of conflict with Hamas or whatever they've been funding to maintain that issue, which is Hamas. That's one of the examples. It says for 2 decades, from 1953 to 73, the Palestinian issue was treated essentially as a refugee problem. Eventually, in 74, the United Nations General Assembly then explicitly recognized the Palestinian people were entitled to self-determination in accordance with the United Nations Charter and to reaffirm their inalienable right of return in this context. And this is where that was born from. From then on, the Palestinian question was no longer about refugees, which, by the way, was disingenuous from the get-go because it wasn't that they were just flowing refugees from nowhere. It was that they were refugees because of this problem. It says, but a crucial political issue acknowledged by the assembly as lying at the heart of the Middle East problem. Think about that. Everything else there, all the conflict, all they're arguing anyway, stems all back to this point. This is why the Arab nations got involved. I mean, you can see how this all stems from there. There is an increasing recognition in world opinion that any settlement of the Middle East dispute will not be possible without the restoration of their right of return. This part simply says the course of historical events that created the Palestine problem, in quotes is what they're calling it, where the majority of the indigenous people are in exile, denied the right of return to their homes, needs only a summary survey in place. Basically, the point there is just reiterating the fact that it's very clear that this was all of Palestine. Here it says, as a result of the conflict in Palestine, almost the whole of the Arab population fled or was expelled from the area under Jewish occupation. This is before the state of Israel. By June 1967, before war again flared in the Middle East, the Palestinian Arab population numbered about 2.7 million. Of these, 1 million were in exile, mostly in neighboring Arab countries. So it's not just Gaza, West Bank, guys. There are people all over the world, Syria, Gaza, they'll list them off here. Another 1 million lived in the West Bank, the portion of Palestine under Jordanian control, at least then. 400,000 lived in the Gaza Strip under Egyptian control then, and the remaining 300,000 had remained in Israel and Israeli-controlled territory, right? But now, obviously, this whole issue that Egypt and Jordan ultimately occupied certain areas here, but there's an argument about whether that was in protection of the area versus the Zionist influence over it, but then never gave it back, which, I don't think Jordan and Egypt are completely without guilt in this process. But it says the 1967 war, Israel occupied the entire territory of historical Palestine. It's in addition to the areas in neighboring Arab states, by the way. So, this includes, this is the idea of Lebanon, these different conversations. This is the illegal occupation. It says there was a second great exodus of Palestinian refugees, almost 500,000. By 1970, according to the expert demographic estimates of about 3 million Palestinians, less than half lived within the borders of Palestine. About 400,000 as Israeli citizens, and which, by the way, have been systematically, what's going on, and about 1 million as inhabitants of the occupied territories of West Bank, Gaza. Of the remaining 1.6 million Palestinians that were all pushed and driven violently out of their homes, about 800,000 in Jordan. And by the way, even to this day, in refugee camps that are night and day compared to what Gaza looks like, or the West Bank for that matter, 600,000 in Syria and Lebanon, and the remaining 200,000 scattered in other countries. This is the state of the Palestinian diaspora. For almost 2 decades, the Palestinian problem was treated essentially as a refugee until its recognition by the UN as the political issue concerning the existence of the Palestinian national identity with the right to self-determination. But, as already pointed out, the fundamental right has little meaning without the recognition and securing of the right of return. Now, this is important that the UN mediator said this. During his mediation mission in Palestine, Court Bernadotte made it one of his first priorities to try and obtain from Israel the recognition of the right of return of Palestine. I think this was, where's the date? It was in here somewhere. I think this is years, almost a decade after the initiation of this. And so he's just simply saying he tried to get their recognition of it, to acknowledge that they're finally going to follow through. And he says, quote, from the start, I held the firm view that taking into consideration all the circumstances, the right of these refugees to return to their homes at the earliest practical date should be established, which has been the same point from the UN before that and ever since. He says, I consider this important, the principle sound and the danger to Jewish security slight. Well after the fact, guys. Well after the first Nakba. Basically pointing out that this is the illusion of their risk by Palestinians is slight in the perception of the UN. And of course, when this was brought up to Israel about the right to return and that they needed, they're obligated, Israel simply refused. Now, the point of this is it goes on to say the mediator, however, insisted that it was imperative that the right of return of the Palestinian refugees be established by the United Nations. Right? Who cares what Israel? The point is also this was a state that they allowed to happen, right? And they're simply going, well, you have to do this. Israel saying no. And so he's going around and going, well, too bad. The United Nations, this has to happen. And it says, notwithstanding the views expressed by the provisional government of Israel, but by the way, is an illegal state that is existing at that point in time on top of Palestine, right? So you have to realize they've been very clear about that. It says, it was my firm view, he says, that the right of the refugees to return to their homes at the earliest practical date should be affirmed. That's despite Israel saying no. I just don't see how much more clear this can get. Now it says the UN establishes the right of return. This is Resolution 194. They declared that the refugees wishing to return to their homes and live at peace with their neighbors should be permitted to do so at the earliest practical date, and that compensation should be paid for the properties of those choosing not to return for loss of or damage to property, which under principles of international law or inequity should be made good. Doesn't matter because they didn't care, but that's powerful. Yeah, I think it's what's interesting here. Ultimately saying that they have to pay them if they choose not to come back, right? So you have two things happening here. Is one, that and it's important, it is important that it says live in peace. And that's important. That's been the sticking issue, that they try to pretend that none of them can come back because they all don't want to live in peace. But that's clearly not the case. I mean, isn't Israel right now arguing that there are some innocent Palestinians? So those people, in many cases, have tried that and they just get refused. So it's a disingenuous ploy. But what about the other side of it? What about the ones that just don't want to come back or haven't? Why haven't you paid them the money they're owed all this time ago? They'll never do that. Now they're pretending like these enshrined rights mean that they want to murder Jews. I mean, that's how completely contorted this whole thing has gotten. But none of that has happened. It says this basic resolution established the right of return 3 decades ago, and the General Assembly has reiterated it in virtually every session since then. Think about that. Now, obviously, this is an old document, but it's just after enough influence and lobbying and propagandizing from the Zionist agenda, this stuff just drifted away. Politician after politician who got elected on AIPAC money suddenly, or whatever it was all that time ago, suddenly started pretending like these things didn't exist. I don't think there is a Palestine. Maybe they're all terrorists. That's how that happened, guys. And if you think that's not undue influence from a foreign entity, then you're not paying attention. It says in every resolution reiterating the right of return, the Assembly has declared that it notes with deep regret the repatriation or compensation, right, either letting them back or paying them for it, of the refugees as provided for in paragraph 11 of the General Assembly Resolution 194 has not been affected. They're just, and again, acknowledging that Israel just didn't care. So they have always been illegitimate and illegal. They've never done what they were supposed to do, even from the very beginning. And that's not even, that's to say that before that even, the Zionist agenda used terrorism to initiate this, according to literally everybody involved. It says, it is important to note that the right of return was established with the sole qualification that they, quote, live at peace with their neighbors. And again, I can acknowledge that. It's very real. But you can't pretend like the entire body is one entity. And the obvious point is that there is a huge portion of Palestinians that do want that. And as evidenced by the agreement to the 1967 borders. Right at that point in time, the argument should have been, settle this. But of course, that's not what happened, because ultimately what ended up happening was the engineering of the collapse of the situation by funding Hamas, by putting poison pills in all the agreements so it makes them refuse. It's just like what's happening with the ceasefire today. And by the way, all of those things are public information you can look up, even cited by other Israeli entities. But it says in establishing the UN Relief and Works Agency, so UNRWA, in 1948, pardon me, and in prolonging its mandate, The General Assembly consistently specified that the financing and activities of UNRWA were without prejudice and to the right of return established by Resolution 194. So here's where this starts. And that they created this to be able to keep track of where they thought they'd be allowed to go back within a period of time. Like, give it a couple of months. We'll keep all your records. And as soon as we solve it all, we'll make sure you go back to where you're supposed to go. Israel has never allowed that. Following the 1967 war, new UN resolutions called again for the return of the Palestinian refugees. All right, so another push after this. And obviously, that was an opening right there, right? Pretending like Israel had some good intentions here. In 1967, Security Council resolutions considered binding all other member states required Israel to undertake obligations to end the return of the second wave of Palestinian refugees to their homes. I mean, so not only was everybody, as it says, binding on all member states, required Israel to undertake these obligations to cooperate in returning them to their homes. Resolution 237 of June 14th, 1967, endorsed by the General Assembly in its Resolution 2252, declared that essential and inalienable rights should be respected even during the vicissitudes of war. So that was important because what it says is, look, we're getting past this point where you can pretend you're always at war. Like, let's realize how embarrassing it is that people like Elon Levy are now trying to pretend that UNRWA means that they are having a forever war, while Israel has maintained a forever war in order to pretend like they're always hostile, so they don't have to let them come home. That's what's actually happening, even to the point to where the UN passed a resolution that says, look, it doesn't matter anymore. Even during wartime, the point should be that you respect their inalienable rights to come back to their property. And they still didn't care. It says, calls upon the government of Israel to facilitate the return of those inhabitants who have fled the areas since the outbreak of hostilities. They didn't care. It says, thus, all member states of the UN, in particular Israel, which is in occupation of the territories, also very clear, from which Palestinians have been exiled, all of it, are under obligation to facilitate the return of Palestinians to their homes. The UN, however, so far, all the way to this very day, guys, has been unable to secure Israel's acknowledgement of the right of return. And therefore, the Palestinian people may not be able to exercise this fundamental right, which therefore means they do not have self-determination. And that's where it is. All the other narratives and justifications and everything else is all designed to make sure this doesn't happen. And now they're trying to spin it on its head and say, UNRWA's a terrorist organization. They're Hamas. Oh, you mean the group you funded to keep them separated? No, don't talk about that. I mean, it's just so transparent. Now, here it says the replies of the Israeli representative in respect to the right of return of the refugees gave some indication of Israel's intended policies. Now, this is just Israel admissions to the UN member states, basically saying it was recalled that the Israeli prime minister had informed the Commission for Palestine that he, quote, did not exclude the possibility of acceptance for repatriation of a limited number of Arab refugees, but he made it clear that the government of Israel considered that the real solution of the major part of the refugees, the question lay in the resettlement of refugees in Arab states. Oh, how funny. The solution of then is the solution of today. Funny how they've just been pushing for the same damn thing ever since. But realize what it says right there. So here's Elon Levy pretending that this is fake news, that they're all terrorists and this is completely based in nothing. Oops, except for the fact here's Israel on the record going, yeah, we acknowledge that. We acknowledge the fact that they can come home, but we think it's better to go over there. So Elon Levy is a liar, and it's clear as day right there. But it also says, when asked whether Israel accepted or rejected paragraph 11 of the resolution 194, providing for the return of displaced Palestinians, here's what they said. No, my government does not reject that or any other paragraph of the General Assembly resolution of 11 December. Oops. The return of Arab refugees is conditioned, they said, by two overriding considerations. First, the existence of peaceful conditions, which, by the way, they already said, right, in the vicissitudes of war, they should be able to go home. But they're just saying, well, we disagree. But that's not how this is supposed to work. But it says, for otherwise, the whole criterion of living in peace with our neighbors would not arise. And secondarily, practicably as the earliest practicable date. But let's realize this has already been met. The earliest mediator was already clear about the fact that he felt that the risk there was slight in the first place. They're the ones that maintained and increased the conflict so they could make this statement. The UN has made the same statements many times. And it says, in Mr. Ben-Gurion's view, This passage made the possibility of the return of the refugees to their homes contingent, so to speak, on the establishment of peace, I would say in quotes. The government of Israel considered the refugee question as one of those which should be examined and solved during the general negotiations for the establishment of peace in Palestine. So all they really did was hinge this on the idea that unless we establish some kind of a peace, which, by the way, we've proven over the years that Israel has no interest in achieving, that was the whole point, that this would never be resolved and they would never be allowed to go home. And then, of course, as long as they can make it seem like the Palestinians are the reason it's never happening, well, they go, look, see, they don't want it. And that is the disgusting nature of this whole conversation. Except the point to remember at the bottom there is that they acknowledge the right of return. So why then is Elon Levy here acting like that's not a real thing? Because they're liars and because they are actually trying to murder these people while pretending they're helping them. It is grotesque. Now, Chuck Schumer says this on the 14th, which I think is hilarious. And it's the same point. These people are clear. And by the way, this is the guy who just called for Netanyahu to step down or to have new elections, which is crazy to me. But it says, it's troubling to me, he says, that many people, especially on the left, seem to acknowledge and even celebrate this right to statehood for every group but Jews. Okay, we'll come back to that. Jews have a human right to their own state, just as any other people do, Palestinians included. Okay, well, let's address this first of all, the idea that this is about Jews having a right to their own state. Now, do Christians have a right to their own state? Do Muslims? Right? Now, there's definitely very Muslim countries or even very Christian countries, but they're not the country for the Christians alone, which is what the Jews say, or specifically the Zionist control over it. But the idea being that this is about only for Jews. Do I need to pull it up? I mean, it's a very public statement by Netanyahu. So what they're really doing, as always, is conflating the idea, as I just showed you, of Zionism with Judaism by acting like you let, whatever, just Americans have their own country. You let British people have their own country. You let Spanish people have their own country. Well, the argument then would be that you let Israelis have their own country, which, by the way, only became an ethnicity or as nationality after the illegal occupation of Palestine. But so be it. All this time forward, there is an Israel, and people are born there, so they're Israeli. They're not Jewish because they're born in Israel. They're Israeli. You're Jewish if you practice Judaism. It's amazing we have to explain all of this, but the point is, here's Chuck Schumer knowingly trying to conflate those things, to pretend that anybody's acting like they don't allow the Jews to have their own state. I don't even know where that's coming from. Who is saying that? Who is going, we don't want the Jews to have their own state? No one is saying that. What we're saying is the illegal state of Israel is premised on the idea of taking land from somebody else, and that's because of a Zionist agenda. The only people making that about Judaism are racists and Zionists. That's the point. But Scott Ritter says, you're a Jew, Chuck. You're the senator of New York, where I live. Are you stateless? Modern Israel is a construct of American Jews like you, really largely coming from Eastern Europe. But it says it wouldn't exist without the largesse, I think, I forget how you pronounce it, right? And backing you and your ilk provide. It says you use Israel to create divisions here in the U.S. and abroad that you then exploit for your own political gain. We see through your scheme. Just to make myself clear, Jews are not the problem. Israel and its supporters are. 100%. And this is why people are, look at the ratios. This is constant right now. He got ratioed completely. Now, when I looked before, that was way lower. He probably went out and bought some likes and it still didn't happen. But way more likes on this one too. And then again, here's a great clip from Arnaud Bertrand simply showing you that we're now starting to see real serious pushback from heads of state, which has always kind of been there, especially from group like I think specifically the Malaysian prime minister. But it's hard for me to hear statements like this and not consider at the very least that this person may actually be somebody who has to some degree integrity and morals. Or maybe it's just a political agenda around Israel and he wants you to think that. Either way, I'm jaded when it comes to any politician, and I always second guess about whether they just want you to think a certain thing or they actually care about it. But I'll tell you, his statement here is honorable and it's right.
Klar, Israel hat jedes Recht, sich gegen den terroristischen Angriff der Hamas zu verteidigen.
I forgot it was so he says Germany's position is clear.
Klar, Israel hat jedes Recht, sich gegen
Israel has every right to defend itself against the terrorist attack of Hamas. Just the same old nonsense. The German prime minister, chancellor. Israel has every right to defend itself.
Deutschland hat eine
Germany has a special and good relationship with Israel.
Gute Beziehung zu Israel.
We have a clear position about what is necessary now.
Jetzt dazu zählt die
This includes the release of
dazu
hostages,
zählt humanitäre
includes
Hilfe,
humanitarian
dazu
aid,
gehört die Perspektive einer
includes the perspective of a
Zwei-Staaten-Lösung
two-state
und die
solution. Like it's the same nonsensical thing that Israel's going, are you kidding me? Like, you're ridiculous. We said no to that a year and a half ago. We've never wanted a two-state solution. That's now being recognized, right? Or the fact that aid, they're the ones literally making sure it doesn't come in, and you're telling us that it's embarrassing. But this is what we need to think about in what actually went down World War II discussions about Zionism, the overlap of Nazism and Zionism, which is an open secret that's easy to look up, and the reality of why Germany seems so completely beholden to whatever the Israeli state wants.
Gründung Israels sehr unterstützt.
Now here is the Malaysian Prime Minister. This is in English, like you wouldn't have been able to figure that out.
Cannot find a solution by getting so one-sided in terms of looking only at one particular issue and erase 60 years of atrocities. The solution is not just releasing the hostages. What about the settlements? What about the behavior of the settlers now? Continues daily. What about the dispossession, their land, their rights, their dignity, their men, their women, their children? Are these of no concern? Where have we thrown our humanity? Why this hypocrisy?
Right.
Why this selective and ambivalent attitude towards one race and one another?
I mean, is it possible that these leaders are actually real, genuine, honest people? Trust me, it's going to take a lifetime to convince me of that for any politician. But I'm just saying, like, this is whether it's him saying this because he wants you to think he's a good person, that's what a good person says, right? The reality that you're like, hold on. I mean, like, everybody, including their own politicians and their own circles, what the German chancellor said is painfully stupid. We believe in a two-state solution, and we have a good relation. They have a right to defend themselves. Hamas human shields. It's just the same monotone drone nonsense that does not actually discuss the entire situation. Right. What about the illegal settlements? What about the fact that they've all lost their own property and land, or all the murdered children? Like, how can you pretend like only what he said is something that we can nod our heads along to? It's crazy. But thank God some people are having the courage to speak up about it. Finding the courage.
An ambivalent attitude towards one race and one another. We did because they are colored or they are different religion. But I, of course, cannot accept the fact that when you discuss issues, we only confine to one particular incident and one victim, forgetting the thousands and thousands of victims from the Nakba of 1947, 1948.
Right. Or 60s, or every other in between, and the Nakba #2 and everything else. How constantly this has been the reality. And on that very point, here's Zach Foster. We interviewed him recently. Zach Foster, PhD. He says, on January 26, 2024, the ICJ ordered Israel to take all measures in its power to prevent acts of genocide. Just since then, just since January 26th, and let's just start at the bottom. Between the 26th and 28th, 339 Palestinians were murdered by Israel. Between January 28th and 29th, 215. To the 30th, 214. To the 31st, 150 more. To the 1st of February, 118 more. To the 2nd of February, 112 more. To the 4th of February, 234 more. All these are Palestinians being murdered, not Hamas members. February 5th, 113. To the 6th, 107 more. To the 7th, 123 more. To the 8th, 130 more. To the 9th, 107 more. Oh, big day on the 12th. Between the 9th and the 12th, 393 Palestinians killed. Between the 12th and the 13th, 133 more were killed. Between the 14th and the 15th, 87. I skipped one, but the point is, all the way to today, every single day, tens upon tens, if not hundreds of Palestinians being murdered. And that's them walking it back? No, that's them increasing it, going, oh yeah, you want us to stop? We don't care what you think. Calling the world's bluff. Here's what Rosella said. In the meantime, we've normalized even the massacre of starved people looking for food. After the complete destruction of hospitals, civil infrastructure, cultural and religious institutions, landmarks, and of course, the killing of over 30,000 human beings. In what world? Again, these are those moments where you're just like, we have been, I refuse to believe this is what the world actually is. We have been overtaken, if not even momentarily, by really bad people. That's what we're seeing. But look at what's happening. Look at the pushback. It did not work. People are being murdered, But they're now pretending to be good people in order to get you to stop paying attention to how evil they are. That's what's happening. All the stuff we just said, how anybody can pretend that makes sense. And one more point before we get even further. This was just being discussed on Richard Medhurst's channel. I haven't gone any deeper on this. It was just before I went live, but I just think this is so crazy this is not being discussed on a broad scale, which really tells me something. This is March 12th. From Israeli news, Iraqi terror group claims to target Ben Gurion Airport, an Israeli airport, in a drone strike. Now, think about how crazy that is in the context of like outside of this right now. Remember when it was even like alluded to the fact that Iran fired a drone missile at like one time and it was like the news for a week? This is Iraq bombing Israel, if you really want to break it down. And where's the conversation? I think what this demonstrates, because here's the point. If Israel and the U.S. made a big deal about this like they usually do, which is because they want you to think this is, we're being attacked. If they did it now, I honestly think that I think they recognize how badly they're losing control of this, and this would only make it worse in this moment. But I argue there's groups within the Israeli government that are desperate to drive this into the regional war, and there's some that are seeing that they're going to lose everything if they keep pushing that. These maniacs, the Zionist maniacs that are driving this, the religious Zionism party, I don't think they even care. But I just found that really crazy. So here's his report if you want to watch the full thing, 14 minutes long. I just think that's crazy to me that that's not this huge story that it usually is. Now, let's talk about the Flower Massacre, 0.2, 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, the ongoing massacres of aid seekers, or rather specifically starving Palestinians trying to get food. Now, this is where I first saw this today. Thank you, Orwell, for showing me this. At least 40 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli artillery shells and helicopter fire while waiting for aid trucks in Gaza overnight. The death toll is expected to increase as more bodies are being retrieved. Now, she's the strategic director for Euromed Human Rights Group. Here's the Washington Post. Even the Washington Post. Imagine a time before this where the Washington Post or New York Times, on the day things happen, actually report, hey, Israel murdered people. When's the last time you've ever seen that? Now, hear me. I do not believe it's because they finally suddenly have a conscience. I think they've lost a lot trying to toe these lines and are suddenly showing you what they know you want to see, which is suddenly the truth. But the point is, at least 20 killed awaiting aid in Gaza. This is Israeli forces. Oh, that's funny. Hold on. Was this? I read the current version. This is the archive. Let's see what it says. The Israeli Defense Forces said Palestinian gunmen opened fire as the crowd gathered. And it's just the same thing every single time. We have to realize that what these things are, it's the same point every time. Same point every single time. Just so you know, the reports from everywhere else other than IDF are that Israel fired on aid seekers and everybody saw it happen. The reality is that either way, Israel has a responsibility to protect these aid convoys. The reason the World Food Program said they can't do it anymore or weren't for a long time is because, one, the IDF were shooting at them, and two, that they weren't being given security. And if they go, well, UNRWA's supposed to do it. You're the one saying UNRWA's Hamas, and you said if we see them around the aid, you're going to fire on them. So explain how that makes sense together. So if they're not there, it's their fault for it getting bad. But if they are there, we're shooting them, and that's why it gets bad. That's the kind of Zionist narratives you've been getting, and it's ridiculous and obvious. The point is that the IDF are present, and then they shoot them anyway. But the point is the IDF being present is proof that there's no Hamas or UNRWA around. And UNRWA's been clear about that. And yet they keep blaming everybody else anyway, because IDF said somebody else shot. Well, guess what they said in the Flower Massacre? The same thing. Remember, Elon Levy came out and said, we did not shoot at the convoy. We did not, and then deleted it. Because the investigation proved that they very clearly did. And remember, Mark Regev tried to pretend that they weren't even there until on that same interview got caught saying that and was like, well, we were, but every step of that whole narrative got proven to be false until they finally admitted, well, we did shoot, but it was because they rushed us. So that went from we weren't there, we did shoot, but we didn't shoot, but we did shoot, but they rushed us. I mean, okay, what's the next lie going to be? It's just lie upon lie. Well, okay, you tell us what you think and we'll tell you what we want you to think. That's what's basically happening. Over and over and over. And here's another one, sadly enough. Breaking from Palestine government media office, the Israeli army, and by the way, don't forget that they keep trying to pretend that these numbers aren't at face value, even though the Israeli military and intelligence are telling you that they are legitimate. Let's see if I can grab this. Yes, there it is. This one I find more important. This is just Vice News, not the person reporting it, but because it's Israeli intelligence. There's two reports about this. Israeli army spoke up and said, we see these as reliable. That's the word they used. That paraphrasing, by the way, but that's what the report was. And Vice News reported later than that the Israeli intelligence deemed that their Hamas-run health ministry death tolls generally accurate. So regardless of what Table Mag says about their own opinion, it's pretty dumb to pretend that their assessment of incomplete data is better than what the Israeli military says that they're using for. It's hilarious. Point is, these numbers are accurate, according to the Israeli media or military. But the Israeli army had the coordinates of this place. Here, I'm going to play this in the background. It's a little graphic, so heads up. The Israeli army had the coordinates of this place where the aid was supposed to arrive, and the people gathered, and it deliberately targeted them. For the 20 days in a row, Israel has been targeting hungry civilians while waiting for aid. The Israelis used helicopters and tanks to fire at hungry civilians, just like we saw at the Flower Massacre. We hold the U.S. administration responsible for failing to stop the genocide in Gaza. It just keeps happening. And most of these seem to be at night. It's harder to see what's going on. Let's not forget, guys, that even corporate media broke down what happened at the Flower Massacre. And they've done it every day since. Every single day since. Cuds News reports, and this is the next day, this is today, that when people went back to try to get their family members that were shot, they shot those people. Israeli forces opened fire at the residents who attempted to reach the bodies of hungry people who were murdered at the, again, Al-Kuwait roundabout. That's the 5th time this has happened in this location. These people don't care that you see this, guys. I think they want people to see this to some degree. Now, let's be very clear about this. And this is what I've been trying to do in regard to these little, kind of breakdown threads, is just kind of encapsulate all this in one stop. So here's what he said yesterday. Again, the problem isn't getting aid into Gaza, except that's exactly what you were saying the entire time. And by the way, they kind of oscillate between those two things. No, they're being held and they just won't let them through. He said that like 2 days ago. Then, of course, when it's this side of the argument, it's about getting it around into Gaza. That's what happens when UN agencies on the ground aren't equipped for the job and Hamas hijacks it. So you're telling us that these agencies are Hamas. So you're now pretending they're two separate things. But either way, the point is, UN agencies on the ground. Okay, they're the ones that you're telling us are Hamas. And if they're there, you're going to shoot them. But then when they're not there, it's their fault that it's not happening because the same group hijacks it. But you just said they weren't there. But UNRWA is Hamas, though. But UNRWA wasn't there. But Hamas hijacked it. But you said UNRWA is Hamas. And Hamas was there. It's so stupid. And it's painfully clear that these things are whatever they want to say in the moment. Overall, Israel's responsible for securing these. Whether or not UNRWA is present or the World Food Program, because that's Israel's job to secure it. They're not military. They're just people delivering food. They're supposed to be there helping them keep this safe. They're not doing that. They're pretending it's UNRWA's job while telling them they're shooting at UNRWA if they're ever there. It's painful, guys. And it says, and that's why Israel's innovating new ways to get aid. No, you're not. You're dragging your feet on everything people are trying to do. People are trying to get aid in here around you, and then you're taking credit for anything that gets around you, while then shooting at people that try to get some of that, while shooting at the aid drops that the United States brings. 2 examples of Israel bombing where the United States aid fell. It's just so overtly obvious. And again, this is kind of this Elon Kogat thing they do, where Kogat cites Elon and Elon cites Kogat, and they act like that confirms what they said. Kogat is an Israeli organization. It's been caught lying countless times while people are starving to death, when their job is literally about coordinating humanitarian aid. Again, as I said just the other day, that's worse than a terrorist organization. Terrorists murder people, right? You're murdering people while pretending you're saving them. Isn't that worse? I certainly think so. But here's what I said. The same thing. The same lie he repeats every single day, among many others, pointing to the completely illegitimate Kogat group who's already been caught lying about aid during a famine numerous times. But here are just the links included. UN envoy says no record of Hamas blocking aid. So all he's saying is Hamas would take it, right? The problem isn't getting it in. It's the problem that Hamas hijacks it. Well, okay, well, the U.S. said it's not true. UNRWA said it's not true, but you said they're Hamas, so whatever. The U.S. envoy said it hasn't presented any evidence. This is a later article. So they still have not presented any evidence about whether this is happening, that Hamas has taken anything. And even Times of Israel reported that. Israel hasn't provided specific evidence that Hamas is stealing shipments. So you keep screaming this, but everybody else goes, well, they haven't proven that. You know, sort of like every other claim they keep making. But then I also point out, well, and of course, this is even assuming that the Israeli government is even letting it through to even be stolen by Hamas, which is the other lie they keep pushing, which they're not. Israel government blocking life-saving aid, according to Human Rights Watch. They've posted that almost every month since this started. They're blocking it. They're still blocking it. They won't let it through. They're still starving them, and nobody seems to care. Here's Refugees International. Siege and starvation. How Israel obstructs aid to Gaza, March 7th. Here's Reuters. Egypt calls on Israel to open land crossings for aid. Why? Because they're blocking it. Al Jazeera. Israel's blocking of aid, creating apocalyptic conditions. So assuming they even get it through, which they're not allowing, they're also no evidence Hamas is even taking it. Then even further, even if they're letting a little aid through just for some faux display of aiding the very Palestinians they're openly celebrating the destruction of, they're shooting at those that actually go for it. I mean, what a disgusting little trifecta, right? Massacre. Israeli forces attack crowds waiting for aid in Gaza, killing 21. U.S. airdrop aid to Gaza after Israeli forces opened fire on crowds sought food. March 1st. Associated Press, NPR. This goes back to December 31st. The Israeli army attacked a UN aid convoy along a route it designated as safe. And then, of course, my article. The Flower Massacre setup, false flag attempt exposed. Over and over and over. So proof Hamas isn't taken, or no evidence, rather, that even if that's the case, they're blocking it from going in the first place. And if anything gets through, that they shoot people going for it. And then, of course, you can point out that Kogat, this outstanding breakdown from October 7th fact check. I mean, it is scathing, guys. I've already gone through this. Point by point by point, they highlight Kogat, which pretends to coordinate, facilitate aid, is a complete falsity. The entire thing, it's an Israeli operation. Trust me, look through this. I don't want to go through a lot of information, but make sure you watch it again or look up the show we went over it. Now, here's the other angle of this. Now, aid is definitely one part of this, right? But the only reason that's necessary, as you know, is because they are continuing to destroy all the food supplies that already existed there by design. And I keep highlighting this, and this is about specifically that Kogat group. Not only are they lying about aid coming in, they're literally trying to pretend like they're bustling with food right now in Gaza. As I said, this Zionist-controlled fake humanitarian group has been repeatedly lying about an overabundance of food, right? Not just pretending they're not starving, which they're also saying, but going as far as to pretend that there's an overabundance of food in a provably destroyed area in Gaza, the Nusrat Bakery and surrounding refugee camp. It's all been destroyed, guys. And yet, here they are pretending it's bustling. Here's just the Guardian link that's showing you airstrikes on Gaza bakeries, all of them add to catastrophic food shortages. This one showing you the Al-Nusrat Bakery absolutely destroyed. The entire refugee camp has been completely destroyed. I'll show you an image of it. My point is, as that's the reality, here is Kogat saying, hey, market scenes from Nusrat. They're lying to you. They're 100% lying to you. My point is down here, I'll show you this next again. You've already seen it. That the actual location they're showing right there, the bakery was completely destroyed on October, which we've already shown you. Now here are more examples of this. This is current. This as of today. Here, this is the same thing we already broke down. Here is Hananya Naftali, which is, I guess, like Mr. Lead propaganda. And this is how bad he is at this. Simply going, this is the Rafah market. Oh, the Rafah market, is it? And he goes, does look like genocide or occupation to me. Oops, typo. Here's Hananya Naftali admitting that it is a genocide. Obviously, that's not what he's trying to say. I just think that's hilarious. Does look like genocide. Hey, thanks, buddy. He meant doesn't look like genocide. So the whole point is while he's knowingly starving an entire population, while they're literally murdering children, he's going, they look like they're fine. No big deal to me. Well, guess what? As I said, we've already broken this down. Take note of the back to school banner that is still hanging in this shot. As I said, I just broke this same claim down weeks ago when a Zionist then was interestingly also claiming last week. How is it possible that it can be last week, but both these posts are weeks apart? But also interesting that it's from months before October 7th, as evidenced by the back to school banner hanging in the background. And this person simply says, I hope the people that have lost family members treat this person like they did InfoWars' Alex Jones on his comments about Sandy Hook. Wouldn't that just be fair and just? What a great point. Here's a guy completely, basically, what's the framing they use for Sandy Hook? Like that he's denying a violent event or what? So the point is, these people have been murdered. This entire area has been destroyed. And here he is going, no, it's a lie. They're all perfectly alive still. Not explicitly, but that everything's fine. Is that not kind of the same thing? What a great point. But of course, it's only a one-sided thing, and I'm in no way pretending Alex Jones is honest, but I think that that's interesting. But it gets even better. Well, some other points to add, but just so you, it's clear. I think this is out of order. Here's the one I should go next to, or go to next. My brain works too fast. So same thing. And here's the actual point. So this is Naftali, 17 hours ago, sharing this video saying last week. Well, here is Kogat sharing this going, oh, this is the week of March 3rd. So even right there's inconsistency between what they're saying. So that's a lie. Well, let's just pretend that was a mistake, right? The point is, this is them saying Rafah Market at that time, guys. This is what it looked like. That's the Rafah Market. You're looking at it right there. So are we pretending that this is why it's so gross to me, that not only are they trying to pretend like they're doing their job of helping people, but they're actually gaslighting you into thinking that it's all good. Everything's fine. Just like the U.S. government is trying to pretend that genocide is actually self-defense. It's horrifying to me. Thank you to Tara Lennon here to point this out this was on the 7th of March. And this is in response to Naftali saying this. And here is Karine simply pointing out, yes, this is definitely not genocide. This is Khan Yunis and UN headquarters, in fact. But look at that. Look at the difference of the areas, guys. This is Haaretz. How are you pretending this is anything but just complete ethnic cleansing? Look at these areas. And by the way, Khan Yunis is the supposed safe area. Outrageous. But here's one of the best parts. So here is Kogat and Naftali trying to go, look, everything's great. Look at the market. Everything's fine. And one of the great points somebody made, by the way, just so you know, it's provable that this is a back to school banner. It's provable that this is not what the market even looks like. But let's just say none of that matters to you and that's not enough for you. The point somebody made that makes a lot of sense to me is that after they destroyed everything and people were dispelled from their homes, that almost every single usable piece of plastic and paper were used to build tents and homes because they weren't supplied barely anything. So what they're saying is that type of banner would have almost certainly been used. And if it was actually March 3rd and the banner was from back to school time, most always these banners, the ink that they use, it ends up fading. It looks like almost black and white. And by the way, you could find plenty of examples of it. So that's not what it looks like because that's not the time they're saying it is. But here, just for comparison, Warsaw Ghetto market scenes. So Nazi propaganda about how great it was there. Look at how the Warsaw Ghetto is full of bustling markets and food. Isn't that exactly what we're seeing today? It's the same damn thing, guys. That's what this was meant to be. Here's propaganda. Look at how they're okay. They're not starving. Everyone's fine. May 1942. Can we not recognize the parallels by now? I know you guys can. And by the way, for that note, I'll include the Zionism, Nazism overlap so you guys can research that for yourselves. But just realize how disturbing this is. I mean, even going into things that I think plenty pointed out, like Eli David and plenty of others sharing images of people in the UN as like rats or even Palestinians as rats. That is literally from the Nazi playbook of pretending that Jews were rats in what they showed in their propaganda. It's the same damn thing, guys. This is a market that doesn't exist, and they're telling you everything's fine. And by the way, this is shared by the parody account, so you didn't miss that. That's why it's actually being shown. Pretty crazy. Here's the other example I've shown many times. By the way, the same one that even Elon Levy just shared on the 29th, by the way, which was shared from Kogat. This is a cycle of misinformation. Here it is, where they're going 20 bakeries now operational. And the point was they took this video The same thing we keep showing you, all the breads in the background, from this guy who posted it on February 10th. Well, actually, technically, it would look like Kogat, which actually makes more sense in general because Kogat seems to be the centralized propaganda push for pretending they have food. So their job is not coordinating humanitarian aid. Their job is coordinating the illusion of humanitarian aid and pretend, by the way, that it's a bakery in Nusrat, the one that's been completely, utterly destroyed. This one, wherever I had that picture, that's the bakery they're talking about. Or the camp in general that doesn't exist anymore. That's what we're talking about. And the point is, Kogat shared it. Then Oren here shared it, and it got fact-checked by Twitter, and it said, sorry, the video's old. The bakery was destroyed. But nonetheless, it didn't stop Elon Levy from sharing it and saying the same thing. 20 operational bakeries? How disgusting. That was last month. That was February 29th. People are literally starving to death. By the way, here's what the British Medical Journal just said about this on the 12th of March. Frustratingly enough, I paid $37 to be able to see this article because it's, I guess all these platforms are doing this now. They're like, pay for the, like you can either subscribe or you can pay for the individual. This stuff should all be public information. My point was, it was the paywall was like right there. And like, this was all that I got. That's it. It's like, man, I got screwed. But either way, the point is, this is an important article. And I'm glad I got to see even the last 3 paragraphs because it's all important. From the 12th of March, children dying of starvation as UN food trucks turned away, say aid organizations, largely Human Rights Watch. Women in Gaza are, quote, burying their newborns every day as they have no way to feed them and are unable to access critical medical care amid supply shortages and a collapsed healthcare system. Humanitarian organizations have said, it says, quote, at least 15 children have already starved to death. And this is only the data from one hospital, right? So you could put that on people like this. That is your fault for pretending like they have all the food they need and they starve to death. That's on you. Hopefully you could think about that in a prison cell. It says, and this is only the data from one hospital. 15 children starved to death. It's only from one hospital. West Bank and Gaza country director for poverty charity care. Oh, sorry, that's the group that said that. It says in the north, 1 in 6 children under 2 is already so malnourished, that they might not survive tomorrow. So we've heard these stats. 90% of Palestinians can't even eat. 1 in 6 children under 2 is so malnourished they might die tomorrow. This was my point about how these parents are ravenously desperate, willing to do anything to get one of the bags of flour, enough for 15 people when there's thousands rushing to get it. What would you do if you knew your child's life depended on you getting one of those bags or one of the food cartons? What would you do? Don't lie to yourself. What would you do? What would you actually do to make sure your child didn't die that night? And then pretend that Israel can say that you're being violent and they'll shoot you for it when they didn't provide protection. They shoot the people that might be there to actually help the delivery of the aid and then pretend it's all your fault because you're human animals. That's where we are. 1 in 6 children under 2 that might die as we're talking right now. Despite this, aid is still not getting in. She continued, the military blockade continues. There's only one group doing a military blockade. By the way, the blockade, they moved to let in construction and vehicles so they could build the port that they always wanted to build long before this situation. Has nothing to do with Palestinians. Quote, the military blockade continues, impeding people's ability to access food, cutting off humanitarian corridors that should serve as a lifeline for people in desperate need. On March 11th, the UN reported that that the death toll from malnutrition and dehydration was believed to have risen to 25, of which 21 were children. Humanitarian organizations have for months warned that the severely restricted access for aid to enter Gaza would lead to famine. Okay, well, here's a good contradictory point. To enter Gaza, right? So remember, his whole big push is that, no, it's not about, where was it? Getting into, it's getting around. Well, even though he's contradicted that very statement every other day by claiming that they were waiting on the other side and they just need to let him into Gaza. The point is clear that the British Medical Journal, in their investigation, the United Nations, Human Rights Watch, and literally everybody else is acknowledging the fact that they won't even let it in and that they're dying of famine, not starvation, famine, extreme levels. UN food trucks turned away. And this is what becomes important because this is not just UNRWA. We're talking about the World Food Program. And what they said earlier this month, they reported that its attempts to deliver, quote, desperately needed food supplies to those starving in northern Gaza had been largely unsuccessful, with a 14-truck convoy being turned away by the IDF after waiting for hours at the Wadi Gaza checkpoint on March 5th. They reported that. I retweeted it. Weird how none of these politicians cared. Weird how none of these people that profess to care about the dynamic brought this up in conversation. Where's the right-wing, left-wing reports? Where is that? You don't need any more evidence other than proof by people that are there, not UNRWA, not Gaza, not Palestinians, who are there delivering food and are literally turned away while people are starving because they have children's scissors or because they literally have food or aid or things they don't want them to have, which is the truth. It says this came just days after the Flower Massacre, 29th of February, during which the UN said more than 100 people who gathered to collect flour were estimated to have been killed when Israel, and it says violence unleashed by Israeli forces. 100 people. So again, the lie that they only shot a few of them that rushed them because they felt in danger, which by the way is their fault because they're the ones responsible for securing the area. So either they're just that inept at their jobs, which is partially true, or they let it get that way so they could run, or they didn't even wait for that, which by the way, that's the evidence. They fired on people getting food, and that's when things got crazy. So the British Medical Journal did their investigation, the UN, Human Rights Watch, they all have proven that Israel's firing on people, but let's pretend like we're still disputing that. It's like the rape allegations. We can prove that these things are baseless, and yet they just keep pushing it to the next day. Elon will wake up tomorrow and say the same damn thing on Twitter, and politicians will share it. That's how this works. The Israeli military has denied this account, of course, arguing that most people were killed in a stampede. They're actually still saying that, despite everybody, including corporate media, including British Medical, including everybody's investigation, Euromed, Human Rights Monitor, Human Rights Watch. They just go, you're lying. You hate Jews. That's it. The UN has, however, accused Israel of, quote, intentionally starving the Palestinian people and has called on the country to, quote, end its campaign of starvation and targeting of civilians. But since the entire UN organization is just Hamas, they must be lying. Except when they say things we like, then we go, yep, that one's true. So Hamas said good things right there. Or whatever inane, ridiculous concept you want to apply to it. Now it says, as aid access continues to be restricted by Israel, some countries, including the U.S. and Jordan, have started airdropping supplies, which, of course, my point is what Israel goes, we're part of that. No, you're not. They're doing it because you won't let aid in. And even then, it seems like some coordinated effort to shoot people going for it. But it says one such aid delivery reportedly killed 5 people after parachutes failed to open. As I told you, some of them were children. Was that on purpose? Who knows? World Food Program Deputy Executive Director, airdrops are at least a last resort and will not avert famine. So they're claiming they're doing this to stop this problem, but they know it won't solve the problem. It's all a means to an end. It's just stretching this out until they get what they want, while hoping that you believe they're doing their best when they're not. It says we need entry points in northern Gaza that will allow us to deliver enough food. The reason they're not doing that, we just talked about yesterday, and that has to do with UNRWA. They're literally telling people that they have to refuse on video that they've ever been a refugee. State for the publicly that they're not a refugee. We don't want our right to return, and we'll move to the south. That's what they're telling people. They're taking facial scans and taking videos and having them testify that they're no longer going to argue they have a right to return, while publicly saying that's not even a real concept. You think that's not, they're obviously trying to coordinate the erasure of any of this information so we don't know what's actually happening. That's what's going on. They're not going to let people in the north because they're trying to get literally everybody else up because they're going to turn the north into another area of controlled Israel's occupation territory. Even though it's all occupied, the point is that this is going to become, as they just discussed, the new staging area, and they're going to pretend that's the two-state solution. So giving them half of what they already were given, which is only a fraction of what's theirs, is supposed to be a two-state solution, even though nothing changes, but all they do is get less land. Talk about a perversion of reality. Now, here's Lieutenant Colonel just screaming the opposite. So we just went over what is provable. Every data point from pretty much everybody now, save for holdouts like the German chancellor. And the IDF just says, we keep expanding our aid efforts. See my point? So it's not that they're not doing it or that they're just being adequate. You're lying. We're doing enough. No. They go, you're lying. We're doing more than ever. We're doing more than anybody in history. You've seen it. We're doing more than anybody in history to avoid civilian casualties. Like, why would you go that far? It makes it ridiculous. It makes it cartoonish. No, we're doing everything we can. That would at least be believable. Doing more than anyone in history while we see bigger numbers than ever in history, they're mutually exclusive. And the same thing here. The IDF keeps expanding our aid efforts, multiple fronts, as you're starving everybody in Gaza. You're horrifying monsters. And this colonel says, humanitarian aid is the right thing to do. Well, I agree with that. Humanitarian aid is a challenge that we must meet. I also agree with that. Humanitarian efforts have been underway since the beginning of the war, fake news, because you've been actively not allowing it. I mean, we even need to go back. Like, it's like they don't think that you can remember this stuff. This was October, Times of Israel. Not only did they threaten to bomb the crossing, Israel bombed the Rafah crossing to Egypt after telling Gazans to flee through it. They threatened to bomb aid if they sent it through. This is October 10th. And here he is going, it's been underway since the beginning? Well, even if you pretend it started on October 15th, that's not the beginning, and you're lying about that. So every single thing is a lie here. Efforts are expanding and completely provably false. Humanitarian relief has been commandeered by Hamas. No, it's fake news. We just showed you the breakdown, which is why I keep making these. That their own people, I keep forgetting which one it is. Damn it. Oh, well. You remember what I was talking about. Oh, here it is. That every one of them are saying there's no evidence of that. No evidence of that. Hamas not hijacking aid. Hamas, no evidence that they've ever diverted aid. Over and over and over, all around, they just keep pushing the lie. Humanitarian aid is not reaching the hostages. Well, what an interesting point. You mean the hostages that you refuse to take home, that you're actively trying to murder, which we'll get to in a second? Clearly. But I said, you're lying, and posted the same information that proves immediately that he's making all that up. Where they just give you some random video that pretends that's what they say. And of course, guess what they're pointing to? The port argument about bringing a fraction of what will ever be needed through a port that they didn't decide, that basically is their plan, that Biden just pretends is his, but is not ultimately about aid. They already offered this same port plan to put Palestinians on. They offered that in January. Remember the Alcatraz Gaza point? Like, we can't remember that. Well, Robert just talked about this. Israel's manufacturing false stories of Hamas killing Gazans to hide all of this. Here's the AP. Israel's not presented evidence Hamas diverting aid, or the fact that Israel hasn't provided evidence to back up the UNRWA claims in general about October 7th. Well, read it for yourself. But in general, let's realize that regardless of whatever they claim and that we can prove they're holding the aid back, that's important to this point. So you can prove that they're responsible. There's no denying that people are starving. But guess what? They're doing that. March 14th, Israel lobby pushes the lie that people are not even starving in Gaza. AIPAC. I mean, this is the kind of stuff we're dealing with. This is the absolute desperation that at the point where everyone in the world is talking about this, you just come up and go, it's not even happening. Instead of saying it's not as bad as you're being lied to about, you have to go extreme Zionist and go, it's not even real. You know, you never go full Zionist. That's why. Senior Israeli official says, well, the U.S. is slow walking aid. Whoa, hold on. Okay, so it went from it's not real, no one's starving, but if you think that's the truth, it's U.S.'s fault. That's just very typical Zionist bad propaganda. So now it's the U.S.'s fault that they're slow walking aid, which the U.S. disputes. This is yesterday. It's just hilarious to me. I don't even care. Let them fight. These are both criminal governments in my mind. What I think is hilarious is that they're now chipping at each other, which I don't even, maybe that's not even real, but nonetheless, you can't say both. You can't say the U.S. is responsible for not enough aid, except, by the way, there's enough aid. It's just so stupid. Now, here's the craziest part. After all that aside, this is the 13th. How does this not sound like a threat? You tell me what you think. Israel says it will, quote, flood Gaza with aid as pressure mounts. So at one point, you're claiming they don't need it, or there's not starving, or we're already doing enough, but now you're going to flood it with aid. I'm like, that sounds very ominous. What do you call me? Maybe I'm just reading too much into it, but something about that makes me think that they're going to somehow find a way to deliver food that will somehow hurt them. I don't even mean like a poisoning concept. I mean, like, I don't know, just some way, like flood the entire area. You know, it's like, that's what it sounds like to me, is like not what you'd expect them to say. I don't know. But tell you what, I do not think that they care about this. And now they're suddenly promising to flood it with aid. Makes me worried what that actually means. Either way, the AIPAC lobby, even after they're telling you that no one's starving, they're just refusing to even hear about it. So they got confronted with activists who are trying to show, as AIPAC, trying to show that look at these starving children. They wouldn't even look at it. They wouldn't even engage with them. They just avoid it, walk away. And this just shows you what the AIPAC, supposedly an American institution, doesn't care. These are American representatives or constituents. Don't you care what they have to say? You should. It's your job. Or not really. It's what you pretend your job is. So let's go to the point about AIPAC in regard to the hostages, really. But first point, just to realize, like this is, I included this link and it kind of, this was supposed to be this next one. AIPAC lobbyists refuse to hear about starving children in Gaza. Now, the argument is this is a group that's lobbying on, American interests, but specifically for Israeli interests, but in an American sphere, but it's supposed to be an American group. Clearly, they're not acting in American interests. AIPAC says, this war ends today if Hamas surrenders and frees the hostages. It's just that same old tired argument that everyone's tired of hearing because, as I said in the beginning, what are you suggesting right there? That we should be like, Hamas, surrender! Okay, they said no. Now what? Like, I don't know what you're trying to make sense of. That all that really is about is trying to pretend like it's not your responsibility. Leave me alone. I'm in the process of the right thing. And until this happens, which is somehow your responsibility, we're going to keep murdering everybody. Or freeing them, quote, quote. Like, that's how this is supposed to be, like they're the ones doing the right and everyone else ignores what's going on. The reality is that Hamas, which you're calling a terrorist organization, is not going to just surrender and give up its leverage. That doesn't make any sense in any context, whether or not you think they're terrorists or right or wrong. So for you to put that on everybody else shows you your complete disregard for any accountability that's obviously yours as you're lobbing bombs into an area full of civilians. Of course it would end if they surrendered. That's a no-brainer. It would also end if the world exploded. That doesn't mean any difference to what's actually happening. The point is that you're ignoring the actual agreement that they put forward that means those people come home, which you otherwise pretend is your primary objective. But here's what Zachary Foster said. You call on Hamas to release the hostages unconditionally, but not Israel. You are a Jewish supremacist. Remember, Zachary Foster himself is Jewish. And he says, Israel's holding 3,484 Palestinian hostages, known as administrative detainees. They have not been told why they're taken. They have not been charged with anything. Their imprisonment is renewable indefinitely. We've talked about this. This goes long before October 7th. It's way more now. As I understand it, it's upwards of 10,000. So why isn't that valid? Because Israel just pretends they're all terrorists. But half these kids these are kids. And that was proven by how many children they let out last time. So the reality is, even if you think that, don't you argue this is a democracy? Shouldn't they be charged and processed? I mean, there's just so many obvious hitches in their narrative. But the point being is that if you want to pretend that their hostages should be released, doesn't it matter that Palestinians are being held? Clearly not. It's a one-sided affair. And that's always how it's been from the beginning. And yet when we care about both sides, we get called racist. And again, here's a Orthodox Jewish community telling you that they were interviewed actually at the rally in DC, and they said AIPAC is a terrorist organization. AIPAC is a Zionist organization that does not represent Jews. Jews will continue to stand with the Palestinian people against terrorist organizations like AIPAC, who are continuing to pretend like the only thing that matters are the Israeli hostages, even as we continue to prove that they're trying to kill those same hostages. Now here, first of all, is Elon Levy today, along with the other propagandist, Eva Klumpus. She says Hamas has presented the following proposals to mediators. Now, look, I mean, it's just text written on Twitter. So by the way, I don't know why you would ever believe what they say they said when 9 times out of 10, almost always, they're not representing the truth. But it says it includes the release of Israeli hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners, 100 of whom are serving life sentences. The initial release of Israelis would include women, children, elderly, ill hostages exchange. Okay, so far, a date for a permanent ceasefire would be agreed upon after the initial exchange, along with the deadline for an Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. The group said all detainees from both sides would be released in a second stage in the plan. Now, there are things left out, but this is interestingly majority of what is going on. And what I was surprised by when I read this, she doesn't seem to flavor it like normal, which is hilarious to me because Elon then couldn't let it sit. Because here's what's great. What this actually ends up showing you, and I'm not sure if she just had a little stroke and forgot to do and did the right thing. The point is that they're highlighting the fact that they're asking for a ceasefire. That's not what they're supposed to pretend. They're supposed to pretend that only that Israel wants ceasefire and Hamas keeps refusing it. Well, that's not the truth. We keep telling you. And oops, Eva just made that clear. The point is, though, that Elon doesn't want that to be the way it's seen. So he has to jump in and say, can we take a moment and appreciate how utterly sick it is that 161 days later, Hamas is still holding innocent infants as ransom? Well, that's his point. That's why he's jumping ahead of this, because the truth is they would have already been home if you had accepted one of the 15 different times they've offered the ceasefire for those same people. And again, I don't even know the truth of whether infants are there or not, because the only one I was aware of is the Bibas child that has been killed by IDF bombings, according to his own father. And yet they keep pretending that they're trying to save him, bring him home. They keep using his memory. It's disgusting. So take a moment to appreciate how sick it is that you continue to allow them to suffer in Gaza, or at least how you're framing it. Or even if you don't think the point is they're still kidnapped, they're still scary. So you're just letting them sit there. And on top of that, they're suffering because you keep bombing them with IDF bombs. So isn't that interesting? So now it's getting to a point to where even this narrative is slipping out to the reality that, yeah, they are offering a ceasefire and they do want these people home. And ultimately, everything in this agreement sounds like exactly what anybody in a fair back and forth would ask for. A real exchange, actual aid, and a complete ceasefire, which, by the way, Israel's going to break in 30 seconds afterward like it does every time anyway, which they're aware of. But at least they get all of their people back, which apparently was the entire point of all of this. All Israeli narratives aside. Well, here she is saying, what if it were your daughter? Yeah, it is sad, right? It's terrifying for a parent to know that their family member, daughter or son, is held somewhere where they could be harm could be done to them. That's terrifying. But my point was, ask Palestinians. Since Israel has thousands held without charge, otherwise known as kidnapping, why is that any different? Or all those whose children, brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers that you've killed in Gaza. And I point to this AP article that clearly shows you, by the way, from April 4th, 2 days after my birthday, by the way, but way before October 7th, showing you that Israel was holding over 1,000 without charge, most since 2003. That is 20 years. 20 years. They're admitting openly that they're holding, many cases, children for 20 years without ever even charging them. This was public information. You bring it up now, post-October 7th, suddenly you're racist. Suddenly you only care about terrorists. It's just so disgusting. And here she is redirecting it. One-sided affair. What if these 14 were your daughter? Well, what if the 30,000 were yours? I'm not trying to pretend. I care about these people. I care about the ones in Gaza. I care about the fact that some of these people aren't IDF members and are probably terrified. The reality, though, is that if they are IDF members, which most of them are, they're military targets. I'm sorry, but that makes them legitimate targets in an occupation situation. Not harming them, not sexually manipulating them, but simply taking them in the context of an illegal occupation war. That's what this is. Per the Fourth Geneva Convention, armed resistance, international law. That's what this is. You can't pretend otherwise. Crimes committed after that act are still crimes. But don't these people matter too? Let's also not forget how the very government that she's supporting, acting like bring them home, as if that's my responsibility, continues to say they're not important. Smotrich says bringing hostages home is not the most important thing. Going back all the way to October, as I just showed you, 19th. Hostages and civilian casualties will be secondary to destroying Hamas. Right. That was their economy minister. First and last priority is destroying Hamas. They were very clear about that in the beginning. Now they pretend like that never happened. That's how Zionist propaganda goes. They just pretend that you're dumb and shut up and you're wrong. Don't look at it. And they all know you know, but they just hope that they can call you racist enough to where you stop acknowledging it. Well, let's get to some of the provable points here on top of everything else we've already shown you. I'm going to go into a new one, actually, some of it anyway. But just to remember the ones we remember from before, here's the Mondoweiss article. A growing number of reports indicate Israel forces responsible for Israeli civilians. The 972 magazine article that shows you a mass assassination factory, citing 6 different IDF members about how they're murdering people using AI. I mean, it's just so much evidence. It's overwhelming. Let's watch this. This is a new report about, and it's Al Jazeera, about another helicopter discovery. This is leaked footage confirming the Apache helicopter side of this, but it gets in depth. I'm not, maybe not play the whole thing, but again, it's important because this is evidence, but you shouldn't need this to prove this point. There is so much evidence about this. It's amazing this is still being suppressed.
In the chaotic early hours of October 7, Israeli forces scrambled to engage Hamas fighters. Apache helicopter gunships fired onto cars driving towards Gaza, aware that some of them were carrying captives.
אני באוויר, באחת הגיחות נאמר כבר שיש חטופים.
ואז מה עושים? איך מבצעים ירי על מי שחוזר לכיוון הגבול?
זו שאלה טובה, וזו דילמה סופר מורכבת.
כל ההחלטה עכשיו יהיה לך. אין לי מי לדבר.
כן, אין לי מי לדבר.
Without guidance, some pilots said they joined local WhatsApp groups to help pick targets.
The idea that pilots have to get information from WhatsApp groups is truly remarkable. It's a sign of the initiative that people are looking for any way that they can get the information. This is an outrage. I mean, what kind of a way is that to fight a modern war?
At least 70 vehicles were hit by attack helicopters.
To me, it's inexcusable for a helicopter or any weapon system to be engaging any target if you don't know what that target is. Now, my concern is, with this footage, we cannot tell whether they're Hamas gunmen or civilians or possibly hostages.
Now, real quickly, since there's a point I want to make about that green screen discussion, the interesting point, though, is that no matter what you think, the fact that this is now approved, the reality that's been admitted by the helicopter pilots, they were firing on things that they did not know for sure. That is a crime. It doesn't even matter if it turns out that you're wrong and there wasn't any civilians. The fact that you didn't know, and Scott Ritter has addressed this, that's a crime. You're literally, this is the idea of bombing these buildings without knowing whether or not there are civilians in it, or rather the specific reality in the reverse of them going in and setting explosives, which means they have proven they're not there and destroying it anyway. Both ways is a crime. And they're provably doing that in this video. Now, I wanted to go over this because it's an interesting game that was played with this whole thing. Remember this whole fact check breakdown? Now, it's not actually wrong, but France 24 has actually done some good work on breaking down lies of the Israeli government during this process. But here's what happened with this. So this video got released. It was picked up by, like you can see in the image here, Pelham, and I think Syrian Girl shared it, and it got a lot of reach. Now, I don't know if they got tricked or they just didn't check it. I'm not sure what happened, but the point was the video actually shows a different location. But what's important to know is that the video we were just showing you and plenty of others very, very much do show what we're talking about. So the interesting part about it is this one was almost, I think, deliberately put out. So we confused it with the other green ones we were seeing about the helicopters shooting on the cars, which they've admitted to. I'll play you the colonel speaking about it. But just because this got pointed out as, no, that's not what they said it was, they then pretended, oh, that's proof that no helicopters actually shot civilians. That's how that kind of thing works. That was actually a pretty well executed attempt to conflate something that was not. And that's why we always point out the fake partisan media, or rather just partisan media, but the fake independent media who do this kind of thing, who they are talking about, like Maui and talking about the problems. And then they swing in with the blue laser nonsense and things like that I've already proven to you is not what they're saying it is. And that gets conflated with the real story. Or in this case, things like this, where there is even a real story, like the directed energy weapon directorate that I found. And I actually broke that story about on the Maui island. And then that gets conflated with all sorts of fake things. And then people say my part of the story is fake. That's how that works. It's very important to see how that plays out. Now, that whole blue thing is so interesting to me because my point was, I remember seeing that original video on TikTok that nobody seemed to check and just shared as if it proved everything, and did my due diligence on it. I know, shocking. And it turns out that was not just a unique to blue thing. It was about a setting in regard to certain dynamics or certain laser settings that affected certain things. And it just turned into this only blue. And then people like Stu Peters literally altered Oprah Winfrey's image to make it look like her roof was blue. And I proved about 30 seconds later that it was a gray roof and it wasn't even blue. And it turns out he even used the wrong house. It wasn't even the one in Maui. But yet it still goes to this very day. My point is always, since I brought it up, was the idea that how do we pretend that a laser is going to not set something on fire, which, by the way, is not completely false. There is a dynamic like that, but then a fire breaks out, let alone a hurricane fire. And you're going to tell me that that laser didn't set that on fire, but then the natural fire just didn't burn it also? Nobody's ever told me how that all lines up. And I think anybody honest hearing that goes, oh, yeah, let that one go. Because clearly, if there's a bigger fire, that fire is not laser fire, that's fire. So why would the umbrellas not burn then? Why would that t-shirt not burn? Because it's just random and fire it's because of wind and whatever else, and that things like that just happen. And by the way, there's probably 40 million pictures of other things, other colors not. It's all selective. Propaganda is like that. So be careful who you fall for. Trust nobody, consider everything, question everything. Back to the video, because this is real. Not this video you're looking at in this fact check, but the actual engagement, as Gray Zone and Mindaweiss and everybody broke down early on because it was an easily provable fact, and they later ultimately admitted to it.
I believe the helicopter pilot or the machine gun operator would be able to tell either.
These big rounds have a certain area effect and obviously come at a certain rate that if you shoot at a group of people, you're most likely going to kill everyone. You are knowingly putting your own civilians at risk.
The I unit compiled a detailed list of those killed on October 7. It found that 27 captives died somewhere between their homes and the Gaza fence. The circumstances of those deaths have not been explained. 12 more civilian deaths took place in Be'eri Kibbutz after an attack by police and army forces on a house there containing captives. Israel's Channel 12 spoke to survivors.
והם הביאו פתאום טנק, אני אומרת לאחד החיילים, תגיד, אבל אם אתם יורים פגזים זה לא יפגע בבני ערובה? אז הוא אומר לי, לא, אנחנו רק עושים את זה בצדדים, להוריד קירות. הם נהרגו מרסיסים, הם לא נהרגו כי רצחו אותם. They weren't killed because they were executed, they were killed by the shooting. One of the Israeli hostages said publicly, and has repeated ever since. הם נהרגו מהירי. היה שם ירי מטורף על הבית. מטורף. טנק הגיע וירה בפגזים.
The first part she said there, she's outside the house. She said that she asked him, what about the hostages? He said, no, we're just taking this one side out. And then they killed him. She was right there. And yet they still tried to deny this.
אז היה. אם זה קרה, זה היה. אם הם מתו כל הבני ערובה, זה רק מהירי.
The investigative unit asked the Israeli army for comment on its actions on October 7. They did not reply.
Of course not.
Peter Charlie, Al Jazeera.
Let's now speak to Justin Schlossberg. He's the co-founder of the Institute for Journalism and Social Change, joining us from London. Welcome to Al Jazeera. Let me just get your initial reaction and your initial thoughts over this investigative piece.
Not that I should stop it for this, but I can't help myself. But by the way, just in case it wasn't clear, someone in the chat was saying they don't think it was a natural fire in Lahaina. I just want to be clear, that's not what I was implying. I think there's a lot of suspicious stuff that happened in that conversation. I recommend you check out our interviews with Shelby and our other work around it. I definitely think there was a lot of stuff going on there. At the very least, manipulative government action, but I definitely think there was more to it. But that doesn't mean that blue laser conversation is real, at least real in the sense they were pushing it. Back to this point, important stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's an important piece for certain, and there has been obviously rumors flying around for a while that a number of the casualties on October the 7th did come from so-called friendly fire. It's important to say, it goes without saying, but still important to say that what did take place on October 7th was horrific atrocities and war crimes, very likely committed by Hamas fighters. It's important to say that obviously in the fog of war and in the chaos and the violence that ensued, very grave mistakes were made by the IDF in their defensive response, in their legitimate defensive response. But it's also important to say that absolutely nothing justifies the indiscriminate killing of civilians, including over 12,000 children on every day since October the 7th, 154 days. What amounts to, according to the ICJ, a possible genocide, according to many experts, an actual genocide, deliberate starvation of a populace is utterly unjustifiable. And these stories do need to come out because they show exactly what has gone so badly wrong with the Israeli response to this attack?
Right. See, I would argue that what he did there is a very balanced discussion. And I appreciate it to a degree, right? That you can argue that, well, yes, over here, what they're doing is unjustifiable, which doesn't matter how much you take their side in the first part. No Zionist is going to support you right there. They're going to call you a Jew hater because you dare to suggest that what they're doing is wrong. But the point is, the first part of it, I just don't know how you can actually pretend that what they did was a, whoopsie, we tripped on our shoelaces and murdered all these people. Like, I just don't know how you could pretend it was a bad, foiled, a bungled response. But I think why somebody like this would do that in a public setting. Doesn't think it's okay, though. I think it's terrible. I think we need to have the courage today to say the reality. But look, I mean, literally what you're showing on the screen proves that it wasn't just an accident. So I kind of find that hard, but nonetheless, I like the fact that people can acknowledge the full picture and not just choose a side in like the partisan world and just lean into it.
Right. I mean, in the days that followed October 7th, we saw that Hamas was blamed for the killing of approximately or more than 1,000 Israelis. And that really was the narrative that was pushed out by Israel and its allies, as well as some in the media, frankly. But here in this investigative piece, what you have now is video evidence. You have eyewitness testimony, and you also have pilots who say that they joined local WhatsApp groups to help pick targets as they themselves had no guidance from anyone. I mean, this really flies in the face of that propaganda that was pushed out shortly after October 7th, doesn't it?
And otherwise, they were lying about it.
Well, I think we need to be careful here because I think, what is very clear.
Anyway, I think you get the general point. I mean, he's kind of pushing back about let's be sure. Hey, I'm always one to appreciate objectivity. But the point is, I think the facts speak for themselves, right? This is like having, a video of the guy shooting the guy and you go, well, and again, and this is a fair thing to say. Maybe the video is a lie, Point is, you don't end up leaving it as we don't know. You argue the video is clear, the evidence is clear, but it's always a possibility there could have been a fake. Like that would be the way he should be acting about this. The evidence clearly shows they knew what they were doing, but maybe there's more to the story. Like that's a fair thing to say. But to end up with the idea that it's sort of like, well, it's probably a mistake, even though everything she laid out makes that very clear. There's people are very carefully, like especially those that are, kind of meekly stepping into this because they are a bit afraid to talk about it this whole time and kind of seeing that the Overton window has expanded. That's what you're going to get. That just people, especially from those who are only doing it to win you over to their side. Question everything, guys. Be careful. Right now, the dangerous time to trust anybody, or always is, by the way. But here is the one from the cradle that I shared a while back. Speaking with Haaretz, Israeli Reserve pilot Colonel Naf Erez describes Israel's response to October 7th as a mass Hannibal, saying the Hannibal directive was probably deployed because once you detect a hostage situation, it's a Hannibal. That's what he said. That's the reality because it's public policy. And he goes on to say, just to make it quick, what we saw here was a mass Hannibal. So how much more evidence do we truly need? The guy literally said that's what they did, or at least that's what this is. And then you realize all those cars were bombed because Israel bombed them. Hamas did not have that capability. That's why they jammed them all over to the side to try to corrupt the crime scene, really. Either way, very, very, very obvious. Now, here was the one I already pointed out the other day, but I wanted to show you some of the lines in it. An Israeli platform put this up. This is from, where was it? That's interesting. Yeah, that confused me for a second. That's what this is about. October 7th. Apparently, that's like a category. Looks like it's from February 21st. I remember talking about this like last week. So what it says, exposing the place, the IDF suspected that, and again, remember the translation from Hebrew to English, sometimes there's a little bit inconsistencies. It says the IDF suspected that they were kidnappers in the building and yet attacked. This person was killed. It says abductees were captured by Hamas alive until the IDF announced that they were no longer alive. The investigation of 16, the scene reveals that 10 of them were killed as a result of IDF activities. So the way to read this is kind of disjointed because of the translation, but the point is they're saying that Hamas took them and the IDF claimed they were dead. But what happened was the IDF killed them. In some cases, after they claimed they were no longer alive. This says, as long as the IDF intelligence do not know where the 134 abductees are, quote, the danger of harming them is constantly present. I mean, no, duh. I mean, it's like, I've been saying that since the beginning. Obviously, anybody with a brain, you're bombing. You don't know where they are, so you could kill them every time. Israel knows that. Only people invested in their agenda don't want to admit that. That's why the families are screaming that they need to take any deal. All for all is what they're saying. The person who says Sharabi survived 97, the one they're talking about that got killed, Yossi Sharabi, survived 97 days in captivity until the IDF announced that he was murdered in the captivity of Hamas, which, remember, those people said they were worried. That's what they report after Israel killed them. He survived the last days of his life in an apartment in the Nusra refugee camp. Another point to point back about why Elon is lying about that area, because he was there when it got bombed, saying that in the Gaza area, together with the Noah Argamani and, these are people, a person, Noah and this, basically two other people, saying on that night between January 10th and 11th, the missile Air Force dropped a heavy bomb on the building they were held in. It was a train building above ground level. One single wall separated the room that was bombed from the room where the three were. See what I mean? It's kind of like a translation issue. The point is, they bombed that building. In the entire Nusra refugee camp, which doesn't exist anymore, even though they're pretending that's overflowing with bread. But it says the IDF told the family that according to the intelligence they had, the attacked building contained weapons intending to harm the IDF soldiers. According to them, they knew that hostages were being held in the area, but did not know their specific location. Didn't tell them the whole truth. Their investigation found. But what's crazy about it is, why is it acceptable to argue that it's okay to murder your own people because they had some guns in there? I mean, isn't that crazy? So now you're pretending that the human shield applies to your own people? Well, yeah, that's the Hannibal Directive. But realize that they're publicly making this clear in Israeli media, or at least to the families. They said, well, Hamas had some guns, so we murdered your family. Is that okay? It's wild. Just like they gassed the other ones. And the mom found out and tried to tell the world, and they tried to hide it. She got the medical report. The hostage came back, and they gassed them with what they were. And by the way, that also shows you that they're bombing with things they shouldn't be bombing with. But it says the IDF shelled the building, even though it had early intelligence information that hostages were there. They knew they were there. The IDF debated for a long time whether to carry out the attack. In the end, the attack received all the necessary approvals. Please read the rest of this. I mean, it's the same thing. They're right now using the memory of these people to kind of convince you to emotionally manipulate. Well, they know that they are responsible for their death. Again, read the rest of this all the way back in October. It's very, very clear what's going on. Now let's talk about Rafah, because all of this amounts to this kind of impending issue, acting like Rafah is going to solve all of this when the reality is it's just the next excuse to continue their operation. And after everything we've heard, even the United States pretending like they're going to make this a red line, which I highly doubt. Today, Netanyahu publicly approved the Rafah operation. Despite even their, I don't even think there's any nuance. Every one of their allies is saying that's a red line, that Rafah don't go in. At least the U.S. gives them an out and says, until you've got a plan, which is going to be exactly what they produce, whether it's a real plan or not. And they're going to go, okay. But the point is that everybody recognizes this is a problem. So just realize that the Israeli government, they don't care what anybody thinks. Not the UN government, not the UN, not their other governments that are their allies. They don't care. So why does anybody else respect their forceful agendas about what they want when they don't care what anybody else wants? I don't even think these other countries want that. I think they're just very aware of how damaging this is to all their agendas. But everybody said don't do it. The UN said don't do it. The ICJ said don't do it. And they go, we don't care. Here's the plan. And by the way, there's not even a plan. It says, Prime Minister Netanyahu has approved a military operation for Rafah in southern Gaza that will also include the evacuation of civilians, according to them. No plan, though, just that we're going to evacuate them. Okay, so you're more illegal mass displacement. Got it. The Rafah operation has been one of the levers Israel's used to pressure Hamas to make for a deal. Hardly. The international community has, this is Jerusalem Post, by the way, for the podcast. It's very slanted to Israel's line. The international community has opposed the move, fearing for the fate of the Palestinians. That's it. No more waxing to that. Just, we worry they may die. Next news, who cares about that, though? Not barely a sentence. Many of whom fled there to escape the bombing from northern Gaza. Yeah, bombing by Israel. The U.S. has insisted that Israel must present a credible and realistic plan. And saying, as of yesterday, that they have yet to see a plan. So I'm sure Netanyahu will write up a 1-paragraph plan like he did about the 3-stage plan. It was all 1 paragraph each about what they're going to do with the future of Palestine. I'm sure that's going to be the same way. And like, it's almost meant to be insulting. Either way, he's telling you what's going to happen. Here's what he said yesterday to the IDF. I told our forces in the field, while you and the IDF are preparing to continue fighting, in other words, starving and murdering children, there is international pressure to prevent us from entering Rafah and completing the job. Now, let me put it this way. When it inevitably does not end after Rafah, let's make sure we make a big deal about that. It didn't happen after Khan Yunis. They said, that's where it is, or at the headquarters are at Al-Shifa, and then it's there. Oh, wait, no, it's there. Oh, now it's over there. Weirdly, every place the massing of Palestinians went. Of course, you could argue it's because they were all involved, but they're the ones telling you they have a secure area. So again, either they're not doing their job about making sure the area is secure, or they didn't care in the first place and or they're lying about it. Either way, they're literally manufacturing the reason to keep killing these people in the place they tell them is safe. And on top of all of that, they're bombing the immediate, like, not just they're bombing before they go, they're bombing on the way, they're bombing when they get there, and bombing back where they were, all at the same time. Over and over, it's been proven from the very first week. Bombing the Rafah crossing, bombing from Khan Yunis, bombing al-Mawasi, every single time. Human rights groups, the UN, everybody's called it out, and yet they pretend like we need a plan. Make a plan to not keep bombing them like you're doing right now, because they're currently bombing Rafah. It's just painful that we pretend. It's this farce. These false pretenses. We continue to engage as if they're waiting and the plan's coming as they're bombing, children starving, not letting aid in. That's what's happening. This is why people are so hell-bent on making sure that people like Biden and Blinken go to jail, because they're the ones making sure this continues. Obviously, with the focal point being on the Israeli government. As the Prime Minister of Israel says, I will repeal these pressures. I will continue to repeal the pressures, and we will enter Rafah. Complete the elimination of the remaining Hamas battalions. Oh, except the leadership in Qatar that you don't care about because you're clearly working with them, in my opinion. Restore security and bring complete victory to the people of Israel. Well, they clearly funded Israel to make sure that they did not have any, or clearly funded Hamas to make sure they didn't have a 2-state solution, while pretending that's what they wanted, while pretending that it was the Palestinians that didn't let it happen. And that's why we're still at war, all coming back to the funding of the very group they blame it all on. Couldn't be more obvious. And now pretending that they're the reason you're going to continue to go after these people in the place that you put them in. And I promise you it's not going to stop there. Here's Euromed Monitor highlighting the issue. The people that are there and how catastrophic this is going to be.
Half of the Gaza Strip's population is currently sheltering in overcrowded Rafah. They were pushed here from all over the Gaza Strip after different evacuation orders from Israel over the last 5 months. They have rebuilt their makeshift tents as well as their lives, despite the Israeli military raids persisting around them. But on February 9, Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu ordered evacuation also from this area, the last designated safe zone in the Gaza Strip, to conduct a ground invasion also on Rafah. But where are more than 1.4 million internally displaced persons, mostly children, supposed to go? The risk for them is their mass deportation out of the Strip and into Egypt. Forced displacements of civilians is prohibited by international law and may constitute...
no matter what, by the way. You don't just because you go narrative and make it sound like, if you don't agree, you're racist. It's still a crime. That's what we were saying from the very beginning. Collective punishment's a crime, no matter what your narrative around it is. Mass displacement's a crime, no matter what your narrative around it is. But they just do it anyway. And all these rules-based international order lackey liars continue to pretend like it's all okay.
A war crime as well as a crime against humanity. In the meanwhile, those people of Gaza City and the northern Gaza Strip who have refused to evacuate their homes are currently facing severe starvation and a strangling siege as collective punishment from Israel.
On top of the fact that we just found out, per the woman driving, actually a former Knesset member, literally the chief driver of the idea, she spoke in front of the Knesset about removing all of these records, destroying UNRWA, and making sure they have no record of the right to return, while outwardly pretending like that doesn't even exist. Right? That's what's happening in the north, where they're forcing these people to renounce their homes. To literally, like that's even going to matter. Like you can coerce somebody into publicly saying, I'm no longer a refugee, and that's going to hold up in some kind of international sense. The point is they're forcing that. They're claiming, they're letting them publicly on record say via video that they renounce their refugee status. and literally telling people that they're going to turn the north into another occupied area. That's the reality of it. There's a whole section of this. And look, don't forget, we've already even seen settlers building in Gaza. Like, that's not even getting discussed or acknowledged, even within the corporate media conversation, or rather just specifically the international community part of this that seem to care about this. Right? It's just like there's a whole section of this that seem to genuinely care about the genocide. But there's so many current points that just don't get brought in that are flagrantly obvious.
They have been using animal fodder instead of wet flour from Israel. They have been using animal fodder instead of wet flour to make bread throughout the past months. But during the last 2 weeks, even animal fodder is no longer available. Dozens of people are currently collapsing in the streets due to starvation, according to our colleagues in Gaza City. No milk is available for children, and mothers are unable to breastfeed their newborns. The entire population still there is starving. Israel's ongoing occupation and apartheid, as well as policies of starvation and forced displacements, are designed to destroy Palestinians both individually and as a group, to destroy their existence, their right to return, and their self-determination. The international community must intervene now to protect the Palestinian people against the mass forced displacement and the ethnic cleansing of the Gaza Strip, to guarantee fast and unrestricted access of humanitarian aid in the north and in Gaza City, and to ensure the safe return of internally displaced persons at the earliest possible stage back to their homes.
It's so wild. So here is one of the points I always include, just so it's clear. Even the New York Times broke it down, even Haaretz, Israeli leading media, that they were already, this was on December 22nd, using their most destructive bombs, mind you, to bomb the areas they were designating as safe before they were told to go anywhere else. Literally going, go to Khan Yunis, and then bombing Khan Yunis with no narrative, no justification, but they proved it. Nobody cared. And by the way, those are the 2,000-pound dumb bombs that the United States are providing while pretending they're pinpoint targeting Hamas by using the most inaccurate bombs possible. It's designed for suffering. But here's Biden pretending like he's going to condition the aid based on this. The moment they give him some faux plan, he's going to pretend like that's okay. Mark my words. Either way, it's going to happen. I don't want it to happen. I'm hoping somebody steps in to do something to stop it, but it's very clear that they're going to make this happen, and it's going to be a catastrophe. It's terrifying to me. I feel like I'm having nightmares about this at this point. This is an impending problem, and nothing's happening. We just showed you this, and just include this again. This is another Israeli article about what they're planning to do. It's public information. Clear geographical separation must be created. Southern Gaza without Israeli occupation and without Israel responsibility, which is ridiculous because they're never going to allow that. Netanyahu has been explicit about that. They're never going to let them. They need to control it for the foreseeable future. So all you're really saying is the continuation of Gaza, but with half the space, right? And then the north with Israeli population. So all you're doing is creating a new settlement in half of Gaza and pretending like it's a two-state solution. And the argument will be, well, it's only going to be a temporary thing until we feel we're safe, and then we'll allow them to have self-determination. Hardly. That's been pretended many times. The fake deal of the century with Trump. I mean, it's just this constant lit game, and they're lying to you. And don't forget, this was written on February 22nd. Netanyahu's Messianic coalition, written by Haaretz, wants an all-out regional war. Their own media is telling the world these people are crazy and they literally want this to be an all-out regional war. So that's what Netanyahu is, that's driving from one side, right? I mean, it's just so clear. And the left is really no better. There really is no left in the Israeli government. But again, don't think of it in the context of left, right in this country. It's similar, but it's not the same. But either way, how is it possible we can pretend that this is about resolving the situation or only getting Hamas out when they're literally telling you publicly they want an all-out war with Iran and Syria and Lebanon? It's just so frustrating that anybody with a brain can see this, and you're getting talked down by CNN and Fox News and Biden or Trump, depending on who's in power. We see it. They know we see it. We got to do something about it. And I never mean violence. Lastly, Alon Mizrahi said this, and I'll leave you with this for the show today. Sometimes a psychopath gets so deluded, they think they can avoid punishment, not by escaping the law, but by making everyone else a psychopath as well. This is the cultural story of this genocide. And to my knowledge, he says this is the first time in recorded history such a thing was ever attempted. Because this is what the U.S. is doing right now. Not only logistically making this possible, but also morally and philosophically. And this is kind of my point about not just saying, that's not bad, but saying this is okay, that it's a genocide, but it's their right to defend themselves. Like this is why a lot of people who have never considered things before have been shaken free from this. Because that just does not, they can't reconcile that with what they've always thought these people were. And it says the U.S. is not trying to tell us this is not happening. It is telling us explicitly, but even more so implicitly, that this is okay and we need to accept it. Meaning we need to embrace a psychopathic worldview and a psychopath persona. I mean, this is a very well put what I've been trying to kind of clumsily say for a long time. The idea that they have always tried to drive, it's like, honestly, I haven't really put it in the sense that I think that they're trying to accomplish this, just rather that, and I do agree with him, but my thought has just always been that this is so hard for average people. This has been so unnerving that they just are so lost right now. And it's a good thing because they're finally seeing through it, because this is just so disjointed from what we've always been told. So interesting. Someone needs to write a whole book about this, really. But he says, meaning we need to embrace a psychopath's worldview and persona. And what better, in my opinion, than Zionism to represent that? This genocide, he says, is a declaration of war on the idea that morality exists or can be understood and experienced by normal people. America and the West are attempting to enforce a new morality. Well, I might add a technocratic morality, or rather, a lot of ways you could frame that, but I kind of think the overlap there is appropriate. But it says a psychopath's morality. That's what he said, in which a dying baby causes absolutely no emotional reaction. Think about that. What narrative makes that make sense, guys? I just think that's so crazy. Do you think, he says, that they are going to succeed? There's no way this succeeds. It is acute megalomania combined with paranoia, racism, and murderousness. I agree with that, actually. That's my point about desperation. What else are they going to do? They've lost already. I said they lost the first week, and I think I was right. It cannot become the norm, he says. Human nature itself guarantees this will be rejected. I really do believe that. And at the very least, I'd say I'd like to believe that that is the truth of humanity. And I do actually think that, guys. As I've said before with Caitlin Johnstone's point, they wouldn't pretend to be good if they didn't at least think that we wanted good. And I believe that. I believe inherently humanity is good. We're all capable of extreme good and evil. I believe that. But I believe it's about choices, and it's about influence, right? When you're constantly bombarded with your own government and propaganda, constantly telling you that might is right? That it's okay to kill them because they don't think what you think. And these kind of terrible thoughts, over time, you may actually adopt them. And it's not because you want it to be bad, but because you've been convinced that that's not bad. This is the reality of what's been going on for so very long, but it is collapsing. The problem is that they're trying to rebuild it underneath it as before it even collapses. So we need to take advantage of that. We need to acknowledge it's happening publicly and stay the course on trying to change it for the better. That's all really, there's a lot more we need to do, but right in this moment, we just need to make sure we don't just jump into the next game. The left-right paradigm is screaming for that. And you see it, I point it out every day. Doesn't mean you have to ignore it. If you think I'm wrong about whether some of them care or not, watch it all. But just please make sure you recognize that the game is about trying to get you to accept the same thing again. Try to drive you back in to accepting the status quo. As long as we remove one player, let's kick Netanyahu off the board. Are we still good? Maybe Biden goes away. Can we still keep playing? How about we just recognize the game is the problem and fight to change it? And the reason that that's so scary for the people in the paradigm is because they're invested in it, the status quo. They're invested in maintaining the problem. Help us change that. Thank you for tuning in today. Always important stuff to cover. I hope you will continue to support this platform and anybody else objectively covering information in a nonpartisan way with integrity, or at least doing their best to do so. If you want to support this platform, there's lots of links below to do so. We've recently started to Save the Last American Vagabond campaign that has to do with frivolous lawsuits we're being attacked with, the IRS coming after me for things that I don't think are justified, most of which we raised this month that, thank God, we were able to actually pay off some of those recent the bills for just the preliminary stuff. The point is, this is going to keep going. And obviously, that's not all of your responsibility. The point is, though, that we won't be able to continue without support. And so all we're ever asking for right now is $1 a month. If you're able to go on and do $1 a month recurring on literally any of the platforms we use, whether it's a donation portal, Subscribestar, Locals has it. I think even Rumble has recurring donations, or directly through the Give, Send, Go. The point is, I'd rather you do $1 recurring. $12 a year is what that amounts to. Something that very few people would ever even think about again, and never think about it again. Just let that, and then you're part of this. Forever, you are the last American vagabond. That's all I ever want for you forever. Just that one-time recurring $1 donation, continual. And my point is, if we get enough people to do that, it's consistent. Derek and I were just talking about that. Actually, I'm going to put up an interview about that he and I discussed tomorrow. But that's what we need to be able to continue to fight this and continue to maintain what we're doing. But it's also just important to fund anybody else doing it. That's what I want you to hear too. It's not just TLAV. There's a lot of other people being under attack, suppressed, censored. It's important that we continue to support them, whether that's just sharing the information or not. But I would argue that if we embrace that model, like almost like an entire, all of independent media model, genuine independent media, not partisan, and applied that you pull off $20, or rather make it simple, like just make it like, what would it be like? I don't know, let's just say $2. So $24 a year. That's it. And you just pull that aside and you make sure that's enough for your main 2 platforms. And everybody did that and leaned into the independent media and never had to donate again. We would revolutionize the entire field. That's the actual value for value model. And I, shout out to a lot of those that have been doing it long before me. In any case, guys, whether or not you're in a financial position to support anybody, and I know a lot of people are struggling, all we need really is to share the work and continue to do so, because people are paying attention. Thank you for helping us do this and continuing to grow. I think we're changing the world, guys. So thank you for being here. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
States, we don't have a Hannibal directive. All right. October 7th was a military defeat. October 7th was where the Hamas came across the border and took you by surprise. They killed nearly 400 Israeli military personnel. The remaining people, about 800, the majority of them were killed by you and your military, who hunted them down because of the Hannibal directive. We now know that the vast majority of Israeli civilians killed on October 7th were killed by the IDF, by Apache helicopters, by tanks, by your own soldiers. The Israelis say, as they were driving us, the hostages, as they were driving us back into Gaza, we were attacked by helicopters. One lady, you killed my husband, you killed my child, I was wounded. We know the Israelis slaughtered their own people. Benjamin Netanyahu, do not equate America with that, because as bad as we are, we don't kill our own people, you son of a